I stood in the center of the courtroom with my hands raised, but the bailiff still shoved me forward. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists, sending a sharp pain shooting up my arthritic arms. I did not resist. I did not shout. I simply looked up at the bench. The judge sitting high above me, wearing the black robe that is supposed to symbolize impartiality and justice, was refusing to meet my eyes. She was busy signing the order for my arrest. Her name is Judge Caroline Sterling. To the rest of the city, she is a rising star in the judicial system, a woman of power and ambition. To me, she is my daughter-in-law. She comes to my house for Thanksgiving. She eats my pecan pie. And she just sentenced me, her 71-year-old father-in-law, to 24 hours in county jail because I dared to speak the truth in her courtroom. As the officer grabbed my shoulder to drag me away, Caroline finally looked up. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any family recognition. They held only a warning that said, "Stay in your place, old man." What Caroline did not know was that by entering my name into the arrest database, she had just triggered a silent alarm in a federal server 300 miles away. She thought she was silencing a senile old man who cleans floors for a living. She had no idea she had just declared war on a retired federal prosecutor who has brought down cartels and corrupt senators. My name is Mose Wright, and this is the story of how I taught my daughter-in-law that justice is not a toy you can play with. Before we continue this story of betrayal and justice, I want to know where you are listening from. Are you watching from a busy city or a quiet town? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have ever been underestimated by someone who should have respected you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me share more stories like this. Now let's go back to where the trouble started just 20 minutes earlier. The air in courtroom 302 smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. I sat in the back row of the gallery, clutching my worn-out flat cap in my hands. I was not there to cause trouble. I was simply there to watch. Since my wife passed away, I often spent my mornings sitting in the back of courtrooms. It was a habit from my old life, a way to feel close to the law without having to carry the weight of it anymore. Today, however, the atmosphere was different. The docket was full, but Judge Caroline Sterling was rushing through the cases as if she had a lunch reservation she could not afford to miss. I watched her dismiss a tenant dispute in 30 seconds. I watched her fine a teenager for truancy without even looking at his grades. She was efficient, ruthless, and utterly bored. Then the bailiff called out the next case. The People versus Bertie Miller. A hush fell over the room as the defendant was led in. Bertie was a woman of about 65, though the hard streets had etched enough lines on her face to make her look 80. She wore a coat that was 3 sizes too big, and one of her shoes was held together with silver duct tape. She looked terrified, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. She had no lawyer standing beside her. The public defender assigned to the court was busy whispering to a colleague in the corner, completely ignoring his client. Caroline sighed loudly, a sound that echoed through the microphone. She flipped through the file on her desk with an expression of pure annoyance. "State your name for the record," Caroline said, not even looking at the woman. Bertie mumbled something inaudible. "Speak up," Caroline snapped. "We do not have all day." The prosecutor, a young man in a cheap suit who looked like he was eager to please the judge, stood up. "Your Honor, the defendant is Bertie Miller. She is charged with criminal trespass on the vacant lot at the corner of 4th and Main. This is her 3rd offense. The city is requesting immediate eviction and a custodial sentence to deter future violations." I felt a tightening in my chest. 4th and Main. That was not just a vacant lot. That was the old community garden site. It had been tied up in probate court for decades. Legally, no one could be evicted from it because technically no one owned it yet, or so people thought. Caroline nodded, her pen hovering over the paper. "Very well. Since the defendant has no representation and has failed to present a valid defense, I am ruling in favor of the city. The defendant is ordered to vacate the premises immediately and is sentenced to 30 days in county jail for repeated trespassing. Next case." The gavel was about to come down. Bertie began to weep, a silent, shaking sob that broke my heart. She did not understand what was happening. She was just being swept away like dust. The public defender did not move. The prosecutor smirked. The injustice of it burned in my gut. It was a violation of the 14th Amendment. It was a mockery of due process, and it was happening under the gavel of a woman who had sat at my dinner table and called me Dad. I could not stay seated. My legs moved before my brain gave the command. I stood up. My joints popped and my old back ached, but I stood as tall as my 6-foot frame allowed. "Objection," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was deep, and it carried the weight of 40 years of courtroom experience. It cut through the noise of the room instantly. Silence slammed into the courtroom. Every head turned to look at the old black man in the back row wearing a faded cardigan and work boots. Caroline froze. Her hand holding the gavel hovered in midair. She squinted, peering over her reading glasses. For a second, she looked confused. Then recognition dawned on her face. Her eyes widened and then immediately narrowed into slits of anger. She realized who I was. But instead of acknowledging me as her father-in-law, she saw me as an embarrassment, an interruption, a fly in her soup. "Sir, sit down," Caroline said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a court of law, not a public park. Spectators are not permitted to speak. She has a right to be heard, Your Honor," I said, stepping out of the pew and walking into the aisle. I ignored the bailiff, who started moving toward me. "You are sentencing an indigent woman without effective counsel, and you are evicting her from a property where the ownership title is currently in dispute. Under state law, you cannot prosecute for trespass on land that has no clear plaintiff." The courtroom gasped. The young prosecutor looked stunned. The public defender finally looked up from his phone. I was speaking the language of the law, precise and dangerous. I saw a flicker of panic in Caroline's eyes. She knew I was right, but her pride was far stronger than her respect for the law. She could not let an old janitor correct her in front of her staff. Her face turned a shade of crimson that matched the lipstick she wore. "Mr. Wright," she said, using my last name with a sneer, stripping away any familial connection. "You are disrupting these proceedings. I suggest you turn around and leave my courtroom before I have you removed." I did not retreat. I looked at Bertie, who was looking at me with wide, tearful eyes. She saw someone fighting for her, maybe for the first time in her life. I could not abandon her. "I will leave, Your Honor," I said calmly. "As soon as you enter a plea of not guilty for Ms. Miller and appoint her a lawyer who is actually awake. Until then, this ruling is a miscarriage of justice." That was the breaking point. Caroline slammed the gavel down so hard I thought the handle would snap. Order in this court." She stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Officer, arrest that man." The bailiff, a large man with a buzz cut, grabbed my arm. He was rough, twisting my wrist behind my back. I did not fight him. I let him spin me around. I heard the click of the handcuffs. It was a sound I had heard 1,000 times from the other side of the bench, but feeling it on my own skin was different. It felt cold. It felt heavy. On the charge of contempt of court, Caroline announced, her voice shaking with rage. "I sentence you to 24 hours in the county holding facility. Maybe a night in a cell will teach you to respect the dignity of this court." The dignity of the court, I almost laughed. There was no dignity here today. Only ego. As the officer began to march me toward the side door, the heavy metal door that leads to the cells. I stopped. I planted my feet. The officer tugged, but I held my ground for just 1 second. I did not look at Caroline. She was no longer worth my attention. I looked at Bertie Miller. Bertie was trembling, terrified that her only defender was being taken away. I caught her eye and gave her a small, reassuring nod. "Do not worry, ma'am," I said, my voice low but steady enough for the front row to hear. "This isn't over. The game has just begun." "Get moving!" the officer barked, shoving me through the door. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the view of the courtroom. The silence of the holding corridor engulfed me. I was walked down a long, sterile hallway lined with fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped flies. The officer pushed me against the wall to pat me down. He pulled my wallet out of my back pocket. He took my belt. He took my shoelaces. "You made a big mistake," Pops, the officer muttered, tossing my belongings into a plastic bin. "You don't mess with Judge Sterling. She eats people like you for breakfast." I did not reply. I just stared at the wall. In my mind, I was already drafting the motion to dismiss. I was recalling the case law. I was calculating the timelines. But more importantly, I was thinking about the phone call I would make. Caroline thought she had won. She thought she had thrown out the trash. She had no idea that by processing my fingerprints, she was about to light up the dashboard of the Department of Justice like a Christmas tree. I walked into the holding cell. The door clanged shut with a finality that would have broken a lesser man. I sat on the cold metal bench. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The smell of bleach and despair filled my lungs. I waited. I knew it would not take long. A man with my history does not disappear into the system unnoticed. The clock was ticking not for me, but for her. Caroline Sterling had just made the last mistake of her career. The holding cell smelled of stale urine bleach and old sweat. It was a smell I had not encountered in 40 years, but one you never truly forget. I sat on the narrow metal bench bolted to the cinder block wall. The cold steel seeped through the thin fabric of my trousers, making my arthritic knees ache with a dull, throbbing rhythm. Above me, a fluorescent light buzzed incessantly, flickering like a dying heartbeat. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the concrete. I took a deep breath, centering myself. Most men my age would be panicking right now. They would be crying or banging on the bars, screaming about their blood pressure medication or calling for help. But I just sat there. I counted the seconds. I listened to the sounds of the precinct outside the heavy metal door. Footsteps, ringing phones, the clatter of keys. A shadow fell across the floor of my cell. I opened my eyes. A young deputy stood on the other side of the bars. His name tag read Miller. He looked barely 25 with a buzz cut and a smug grin that suggested he thought he owned the world because he carried a badge and a gun. He was chewing gum loudly, looking me up and down with open contempt. To him, I was just another piece of debris swept off the streets. A senile old black man who did not know his place. He did not see the man who had graduated top of his class at Howard University. He did not see the prosecutor who had stared down mob bosses without blinking. He only saw what Caroline wanted him to see. Trash. "Comfortable in there, Pops?" Miller asked, twirling a set of keys around his finger. I did not answer. I simply adjusted my glasses and looked at him. My silence seemed to annoy him. "You know most people usually start begging by now," he continued, leaning against the bars. "They want water. They want a lawyer. They want their mama. But you are quiet. I guess you are used to this, huh? A guy like you probably spends more time inside a cell than out." "I am used to silence, deputy," I said, my voice calm and level. "It is where you learn the most." Miller chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, listen up. I just got off the phone with the courthouse, specifically with Judge Sterling. She gave us some very specific instructions regarding you." I remained still, though my pulse quickened slightly. "Caroline." She was covering her tracks. "She says you are a flight risk and a potential disturbance." Miller lied. The words tasted fake, even coming out of his mouth. "So we are not processing you with the general population. No holding tank with the drunks and the brawlers for you. You are going into isolation. Solitary confinement until your arraignment tomorrow morning." Isolation. It was a tactical move. She did not want me talking to other prisoners. She did not want me telling anyone that the woman who put me here was my daughter-in-law. She wanted to erase me until she could figure out how to make me disappear permanently. And Miller added, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, "The judge is a generous woman. She told me to tell you that if you sign a little piece of paper tomorrow morning, a voluntary restraining order promising to never step foot in her courtroom again, she might just drop the charges. She will let you go home to your whatever hole you crawled out of." I looked at the young deputy. He had no idea he was being used as a messenger boy in a family war. "And if I refuse," I asked. Miller shrugged. "Then you stay in the hole. And with a contempt charge from a superior court judge, you could be looking at 30 days, maybe more if we find something else to pin on you. At your age, 30 days in here might as well be a death sentence." He unlocked the slot in the door and slid a tray of food through. It was a dry sandwich and a carton of warm milk. I ignored it. "I have the right to a phone call," I stated. Miller laughed. "A phone call? Who are you going to call?" "Pops, your son. I saw his name in your file. David Wright. You want me to call him and tell him his daddy is a criminal?" "No," I said firmly. "I do not want to speak to my son. Then who legal aid? They are closed. You are on your own." I stood up slowly, fighting the stiffness in my legs. I walked to the bars and looked Miller in the eye. The smile faded from his face as he saw the intensity of my gaze. It was the look I used to give defendants right before I laid out the evidence that would put them away for life. "I am entitled to one phone call to my legal representative," I said. "Unless you want to add a violation of due process to my file, Deputy Miller. And I assure you, my file is about to become the most important document in this entire building." Miller hesitated. He looked at me. Really looked at me for the first time. He saw something that did not fit the narrative of the confused old man. He saw authority. He grunted, pulled a wireless handset from his belt and passed it through the bars. "Make it quick," he snapped. You have got 2 minutes. And do not think about ordering a pizza. I took the phone. My hands were steady. I did not need a phone book. I did not need to look up a number. The sequence of digits was burned into my memory, a relic from a life I had left behind 15 years ago. A life of danger, power, and absolute secrecy. I dialed the area code first. It was not a local number. It was a Washington, D.C. area code. Miller watched me, raising an eyebrow. "Who are you calling in D.C.? "The president," he mocked. I ignored him and waited. 1 ring, 2 rings, then a click. The line opened. There was no greeting, no recording, no receptionist asking how to direct the call. Just a sharp professional silence waiting for a voice authorization. "Department of Justice Special Line," a female voice finally said. The tone was crisp, efficient, and guarded. "State your clearance code." I took a breath. I had not spoken these words in over a decade. I wondered if they would still work. I wondered if the system had purged me. But I had to try. For Birdie, for myself, and for the look on Caroline's face when her world comes crashing down. "This is Mose Wright," I said into the receiver. My voice dropped an octave, becoming the voice of the Hammer, the nickname they gave me in the 90s. "Authorization code 19 Alpha 0. There was a pause on the other end. A long, heavy silence. Deputy Miller was watching me, looking bored, checking his fingernails. He had no idea that the air in the room was shifting. "1 moment, sir," the woman on the phone said. Her voice had changed. The professional distance was gone, replaced by a tone of urgent respect. Verifying biometric voice print. Identity confirmed. "Good evening, Mr. Wright. We show your status as retired inactive. How can we assist you?" I looked at Deputy Miller through the bars. He was still chewing his gum, oblivious to the fact that he was standing next to a dormant volcano that had just woken up. "I am currently being held at the 4th Precinct County Jail under false pretenses," I said, enunciating every word clearly. "I have been detained by a local magistrate in direct violation of my federal protection protocols. I am initiating a level 4 security breach." The woman on the line gasped slightly. "Understood, Mr. Wright. We are tracing your location now." "Confirmed. We see you. We are flagging this as a priority extraction. Do not hang up. We are patching in the district attorney and the regional marshal immediately." I lowered the phone slightly, just enough to look at Miller. The young deputy had stopped chewing his gum. He was staring at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. He had heard the change in my tone. He had heard the words, "federal protection and security breach." "Who is that?" Miller asked, his voice losing its arrogant edge. "Who are you talking to?" I put the phone back to my ear. "Send them," I said to the operator. "And tell them to bring the full file on Judge Caroline Sterling. I want everything. Her bank accounts, her emails, and every ruling she has made in the last 5 years." "Copy that, sir," the voice replied. "Marshals are en route. ETA 10 minutes. Sit tight, Mr. Wright. The cavalry is coming." I pressed the end call button and handed the phone back to Miller. The young deputy took it, his hand shaking slightly. He looked at the phone, then at me. "What code was that?" Miller stammered. "What is going on?" I sat back down on the bench and crossed my arms. The pain in my knees did not matter anymore. The cold did not matter. "I suggest you unlock this door, son," I said softly. "And if you have a superior officer, you might want to wake him up. You are going to need him. Because the man you just locked up isn't a homeless janitor. You just locked up the man who wrote the book on federal corruption. And class is about to be in session." While I was staring at a water stain on the concrete ceiling of cell block 4, wondering if my back would ever forgive me for sleeping on a steel bench, my son David was sitting in a dining room that cost more than my entire life's earnings. I know this because David told me later, his voice trembling with the shame of a man who had watched his father be dragged away and did nothing. But I can also picture it perfectly. I know that house. I know the smell of the expensive potpourri Caroline insists on keeping in every room to mask the scent of emptiness. And I know exactly how Caroline Sterling holds a wine glass when she thinks she has won. The chandelier above their heads cast a warm golden glow over the dinner table. They were eating steak medium rare paired with a bottle of Cabernet that Caroline had probably accepted as a gift from one of the corrupt developers she was in bed with. David pushed a piece of meat around his plate, his appetite gone. The image of me in handcuffs was burned into his retinas, but he was too terrified to speak. Silence in that marriage was a survival mechanism. but tonight the silence was too heavy even for him. "Where is he, Caroline?" David finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You said you were just going to scare him. You did not say you were going to put him in a cage." Caroline did not look up from her plate. She sliced her steak with surgical precision, the knife scraping against the fine china. "He is exactly where he needs to be, David," she said, popping a piece of meat into her mouth. "He is in a timeout. Your father has grown arrogant in his old age. He thinks because he reads a few law books at the library that he can come into my courtroom and lecture me on jurisprudence. He needed a reminder of who holds the gavel and who holds the mop." David put his fork down. The clatter echoed in the large, cavernous room. "He is 71 years old, Caroline. He has arthritis. A night in jail could kill him." Caroline took a sip of wine, savoring the bouquet. "Do not be dramatic. I spoke to the sergeant. He is in a private cell. He is safe. And tomorrow morning, when he is tired, hungry, and humbled, I will let him out. But only after he signs a restraining order. I will not have him interfering with my career again." "Your career?" David muttered, a spark of resentment flaring up. "Is that all this is about?" He was trying to help a homeless woman. Caroline's eyes snapped up, flashing with dangerous fire. "That homeless woman, as you call her, is the only thing standing between us and a very comfortable retirement." She reached for her phone, which was sitting on the table, and tapped the screen. She slid it across the marble surface toward David. On the screen was a digital rendering of a massive, gleaming shopping complex. Glass, steel, and luxury. "The Omni Center," Caroline said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The developers have been trying to break ground for 6 months, but that old hag Bertie Miller and her pile of trash on 4th and Main are blocking the access road. The city wants her gone. The developers want her gone. And if I am the judge who finally clears that land, do you know what that means for us?" David looked at the phone, then at his wife. "It means a promotion. It means a seat on the federal bench, David," she hissed. "And it means the developers act as silent partners in your failed investment firm. They will inject enough capital to save you from bankruptcy." David went pale. He did not know that Caroline knew about his business losses. He had tried to hide them, but nothing stays hidden from Caroline Sterling. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his like a predator. "I am doing this for us, David. I am cleaning up the mess. Bertie Miller is a squatter. She has no rights. And your father, he is a relic. He is trying to save a world that does not exist anymore. So do not sit there and look at me with those judging eyes. If it were not for me, you would be driving a used sedan and living in a rental. I put the food on this table. I pay the mortgage. So you will sit there, you will eat your steak, and you will let me handle your father." David looked down at his plate. The spark of rebellion was extinguished by the weight of his financial dependence. He was trapped. He picked up his fork and began to eat, swallowing his pride along with the cold steak. "He was a good man once, my son. But money acts like erosion on a man's soul. It wears you down until there is nothing left but a smooth, hollow stone." The room fell silent again, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Caroline smiled, satisfied. She had reasserted her dominance. She believed the chess game was over. She had removed the pawns and secured the king. She poured herself another glass of wine, celebrating a victory that had not actually happened. Then the doorbell rang. It was a jarring sound, sharp and insistent. It was 9 o'clock at night. They were not expecting guests. Caroline frowned, checking her watch. "Who on earth is that?" she muttered, annoyed. "Probably Amazon delivering another one of your gadgets." She rang the bell for the housekeeper, but the ringing at the door continued louder this time, impatient. "Useless staff," Caroline grumbled, throwing her napkin on the table. She stood up, her silk dress rustling as she marched toward the foyer. David followed her, sensing something was wrong. Guests ring once, strangers ring twice. Trouble does not stop ringing. Caroline pulled open the heavy oak double doors. She expected a delivery driver. She expected a neighbor. Instead, she found a man standing on the porch. He was wearing a cheap gray suit that looked like it had been slept in, and he held a thick manila envelope in his hand. He did not smile. He did not look impressed by the columns or the expensive landscaping. "Judge Caroline Sterling," the man asked. His voice was flat professional. "Yes," she snapped. "And do you know what time it is?" The man ignored her question. He verified her face against a photo on his clipboard. Then he thrust the envelope toward her. "You have been served, ma'am." Caroline did not take it. She recoiled as if the envelope was radioactive. "Served, served with what? I am a superior court judge. You cannot serve me at my private residence. I am a federal process server, Judge," the man said, shoving the envelope into her chest so she had to grab it or let it fall. "Jurisdiction is not an issue. This is an emergency order from the Department of Justice." David stepped forward, his face full of fear. "Caroline, what is going on?" Caroline ripped open the envelope. Her hands were shaking not with fear but with indignation. "Who is doing this? Is this about the tenant appeal? I will have their license revoked." Her voice died in her throat as she pulled out the document. The header was printed in bold red letters. It did not say lawsuit. It did not say summons. It read, "Notice of immediate asset freeze and seizure." Caroline's eyes scanned the page frantically. Her breath started coming in short, shallow gasps. "Pursuant to United States Code Title 18, Criminal Enterprise Investigation, all bank accounts, investment portfolios, and real estate holdings listed under Caroline Sterling and David Wright are hereby frozen pending federal audit." This is a mistake," Caroline stammered, looking up at the man. "This is insane. My accounts." Why, the process server shrugged. He was already walking back to his car. "I just deliver the paper, lady. But if I were you, I wouldn't try to use your credit cards tonight. They were deactivated 10 minutes ago." Caroline stood frozen in the doorway, the cool night air rushing in, chilling the expensive foyer. David grabbed the paper from her hand. "Criminal enterprise," David read aloud, his voice cracking. "Caroline, what have you done? I have done nothing," she shrieked, the panic finally breaking through her arrogance. "It is a glitch, a computer error. I am a judge. They cannot do this to me." But deep down in the pit of her stomach, a cold stone of dread was forming. She looked out into the darkness of the front yard. For the first time, she felt exposed. The walls of her fortress were not as thick as she thought. What she did not know, what she could not possibly imagine, was that the order had not come from a computer glitch. It had come from a phone call made from a holding cell just 5 miles away. She had tried to bury me, but she forgot that when you bury a seed, it grows. And the roots were already coming for the foundation of her house. David looked at his wife, truly looked at her, and saw the terror in her eyes. And for the first time in years, he did not see a pillar of strength. He saw a woman standing on a trap door that had just been triggered. "We need to call a lawyer," David whispered. Carolyn stared at the document, her mind racing. "No," she whispered back. "We do not call a lawyer. We call the developers. We need to fix this before the sun comes up." She slammed the door shut, locking it tight. But it was too late. The lock on the front door might hold, but the locks on her life had just been picked by a master. Back in my cell, I closed my eyes and finally drifted off to sleep. I slept like a baby. I knew the morning would bring fireworks, and I wanted to be well rested for the show. The silence in the isolation wing was different from the silence in a courtroom. In a courtroom, silence is heavy with anticipation. It is the breath held before a verdict. But in a jail cell, silence is heavy with regret. It is the sound of time being wasted. I sat on the thin, bacteria-resistant mattress, my legs crossed in a meditative pose I had learned 40 years ago to manage stress. I was not regretting anything. I was waiting. I closed my eyes and visualized the digital signal traveling from the fingerprint scanner in the booking room through the fiber optic cables under the city streets, bouncing off a satellite and landing in the secure server room of the Department of Justice in Virginia. I knew the algorithm better than the people who wrote it because I had helped write the legal framework for it. The system was called ident. It didn't just check for outstanding warrants, it checked for clearance levels. It checked for protected witness status, and it checked for deep cover assets and retired high-value personnel. My prints were in that system flagged with a code that had not been triggered since the late 90s. Code red, level 5 protection, 10 minutes. That was how long the upload usually took. I counted the seconds in my head. 598, 599, 600. Right on cue, a sound erupted from down the hallway. It was not a siren. It was a high-pitched, oscillating alarm that came from the sergeant's desk computer. It was the sound of a catastrophic system error or a priority national security alert. I heard a chair scrape violently against the floor. I heard the crash of a coffee mug shattering, then shouting, panicked, confused shouting. "What is that?" That was Deputy Miller's voice cracking with fear. "Turn it off. I can't. It's locking the system." Look at the screen. Look at the name. I smiled in the darkness of my cell. The name on the screen would be flashing in bright red letters, Mose Wright. But underneath it there would be a designation that would make any local law enforcement officer's blood run cold. Retired Assistant United States Attorney. Special Prosecutor. Organized Crime Division. Do not detain. Notify Marshal Service immediately. Footsteps thundered down the concrete corridor. These were not the casual, arrogant footsteps of Deputy Miller. These were heavy, frantic strides. 2 men, maybe 3. Keys jingled violently. My cell door, the heavy steel barrier that was supposed to keep me humble, was suddenly the most terrifying object in the building for the men on the other side. The lock tumbled with a loud clank. The door swung open so fast it hit the wall with a deafening bang. Standing there, panting like he had just run a marathon, was Sheriff Brody. I knew Brody. He was a political creature, a man who spent more time shaking hands at fundraisers than patrolling the streets. He was wearing his dress uniform, likely called in from home, or a dinner, his tie, crooked sweat beading on his forehead. Behind him stood Deputy Miller, looking like he had seen a ghost. His face was pale, his eyes wide and fixed on me with a mixture of horror and confusion. "Mr. Wright," Sheriff Brody gasped, stepping into the cell. He didn't yell. He didn't bark orders. He sounded like he was pleading. "Mr. Wright, please get up. There has been a terrible mistake." I did not move. I remained seated on the cot, my hands resting on my knees. I opened my eyes slowly and looked at the sheriff. I did not look at him with the eyes of a 71-year-old janitor. I looked at him with the eyes of the man who had dismantled the Chicago Syndicate in 1994, the eyes of the man they used to call the Hammer. "Sheriff Brody," I said calmly. My voice echoed off the concrete walls, deep and authoritative. "You are sweating. Is the air conditioning broken?" Brody swallowed hard. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "Sir, please. We just got the flag from the DOJ. I had no idea. The arresting officer, he didn't run the full background check before processing. We didn't know who you were." "Who am I?" Sheriff, I asked, tilting my head slightly. "According to your booking sheet, I am just a senile old man who caused a disturbance. A nobody. A squatter in his own son's life." Brody flinched. He stepped closer, reaching out a hand as if to help me up, but then pulled it back, afraid to touch me. "You are a federal protected asset, sir. A former federal prosecutor. The system says... It says you have sovereign immunity clearance for past operations. Sir, if the marshals come down here and find you in a solitary confinement cell, they will shut my department down. They will have my badge. Please, you have to come out. We are expunging the record right now." "It never happened." "It never happened," I repeated, savoring the irony. "That is how it works for you people, isn't it? When you crush a homeless woman like Bertie Miller, it never happened. When you throw an old man in a cage to please a corrupt judge, it never happened. But when the computer tells you that you just kicked a sleeping lion, suddenly you want to rewrite history." I stood up. I rose slowly, unfolding my frame until I towered over the sheriff. The transformation was complete. The slump in my shoulders was gone. The hesitation in my movement vanished. I was no longer the grandfather who baked pecan pies. I was the law. Deputy Miller shrank back against the doorframe. I looked at him. "You offered me a deal earlier, son," I said to the young deputy. "You said if I signed a paper I could go home. Do you still have that paper?" "No, sir," Miller squeaked. "No paper. You are free to go. Immediately." Sheriff Brody nodded vigorously. "I will drive you home myself, Mr. Wright. In my personal vehicle. I will apologize to your family. We can resolve this quietly. Judge Sterling doesn't need to know the specifics of the federal flag. We can just say it was a procedural error." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You think I want to hide this from Judge Sterling? You think I want to go home and sip tea while she sells off this city piece by piece?" I sat back down on the cot. I crossed my legs again. I closed my eyes. Sheriff Brody looked ready to cry. "Mr. Wright, what are you doing?" "The door is open. You are free. Close it," I said. "What?" "Close the door, Sheriff. Lock it." "But..." "Why?" Brody stammered. "We are releasing you. I am not leaving." I declared, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. "I was brought here by the order of Judge Caroline Sterling. I was processed into this facility under her specific instructions to be isolated and humiliated. She wanted to use the power of the state to crush a family member she considers a nuisance. She wanted to make a point. I opened my eyes and locked them onto Brody's terrified face. Well, she made her point. Now I am going to make mine. I am not walking out of this cell for you, Sheriff. I am not walking out to save your job, and I am certainly not walking out to make things easier for my daughter-in-law. So what do you want? Brody asked, his voice trembling. I want the person who signed the warrant, I said. Brody went pale. You want the judge? I nodded. I want you to call her. I want you to tell her that her prisoner is refusing to leave. I want you to tell her that the situation has escalated beyond your pay grade. And I want you to tell her that if she wants me out of this jail, she has to come down here in person, walk down that hallway, unlock this door herself, and apologize to me, on the record. But Sir Brody protested. It is almost midnight. She is a superior court judge. She won't come. She will have my head on a platter for even asking. Then you better get your resume ready, Sheriff, I said, leaning back against the wall, because the U.S. Marshals are about 8 minutes out. And when they get here, if I am still sitting in this cell, they are going to ask why you are holding a federal asset against his will. And I will tell them it is because you are following the illegal orders of a corrupt judge. Brody looked at his watch. He looked at me. He looked at the open door. He realized he was trapped in a vice between a federal hammer and a judicial anvil. Damn it, Brody whispered. He turned to Miller. Get me the phone. Get me Judge Sterling's private line. Now Miller scrambled to obey. Brody looked at me one last time, a look of pure defeat. She is going to destroy us for this, Brody said. I smiled a cold, predatory smile. No, Sheriff. She is going to try. But she is about to find out that the man she threw in prison isn't a janitor. She locked up the only man in this city who knows where all the bodies are buried. And I brought my shovel. Close the door, Sheriff. I will wait. Brody hesitated, then slowly, painfully pulled the heavy steel door shut. The lock clicked. I was alone again in the silence. But this time, it was the silence of a hunter waiting in the blind. I adjusted my flat cap, smoothed my cardigan, and waited for the sound of high heels clicking on the concrete floor. The lesson was about to begin. I remained in the cell with the door unlocked. It was a choice, a statement. Sheriff Brody had retreated to his office, likely sweating through his uniform and frantically trying to scrub the arrest log. But I wasn't going anywhere. I sat there for another 20 minutes, listening to the hum of the ventilation system and the distant sounds of the city at night. I was not waiting for the marshals anymore. I was waiting for the one person I knew Caroline would send to do her dirty work. She was too proud to come down here herself. She was too arrogant to face the man she had tried to break. So she sent her proxy. She sent her husband. She sent my son. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. They were distinct. David walks with a heavy heel strike, a habit he developed when he started wearing expensive dress shoes that were too stiff for his feet. He walked quickly, nervously. When he appeared in the doorway of the cell block, he looked like a man who had been running from a fire, only to find himself standing on the edge of a cliff. He was wearing his dinner jacket, but his tie was undone and his hair was disheveled. He looked at the open cell door, then at me sitting calmly on the cot, and confusion washed over his face. He expected to find a broken old man huddled in the corner. Instead, he found a judge waiting in his chambers. Dad. David breathed out, rushing into the cell. Thank God. The sheriff called. He said there was a mistake with the paperwork. He said you are free to go. Come on, let's get you out of here. He reached for my arm, trying to pull me up. I did not move. I did not pull away, but I made my body heavy, immovable like a stone statue. David tugged again, then stopped, realizing I wasn't going to budge. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, Dad, please, do not be difficult. Caroline is worried sick. She is at home right now, pacing the floor. She realized she overreacted. We just want you home safe. I looked at my son. I looked at the sweat on his upper lip. I looked at the fear in his eyes. It wasn't fear for my safety. It was fear of the consequences. She is not worried about me, David. I said, my voice low and steady. She is worried about the asset freeze. She is worried about the federal flag on her computer system. She sent you here to clean up the spill before it stains her carpet. David flinched. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. He looked around the cell, disgusted by the smell, by the reality of where his wife had sent his father. Dad, listen to me, he whispered, leaning in close. This is serious. You triggered some kind of federal alert. The DOJ is involved. Caroline is freaking out. If we don't fix this tonight, if we don't get you to sign a release saying this was a misunderstanding, her career is over. She could be disbarred. Do you understand what that means? We could lose everything. The house, the investments, everything. I stared at him. I searched his face for a trace of the boy I had raised. The boy who used to cry when he saw a stray dog. The boy who wanted to be a teacher before he met Caroline and decided he wanted to be rich instead. You are asking me to lie for her, I said. I am asking you to protect your family. David hissed, his voice rising. She is my wife, Dad. She made a mistake. She was stressed. The case with the homeless woman, it's complicated. There is a lot of money at stake. Big players. She was under pressure. She didn't mean to hurt you. She meant exactly what she did, I countered. She meant to humiliate me. She meant to silence a witness. And she meant to destroy an innocent woman named Bertie Miller to build a shopping mall. David threw his hands up in frustration. Who cares about Bertie Miller? She is a squatter. She is a vagrant who contributes nothing to society. Why are you doing this? Why are you choosing a stranger over your own son? Why are you willing to burn down my life for some homeless woman you met this morning? The words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Who cares about Bertie Miller? My heart broke. Not for me, but for him. He had truly forgotten. The money had not just blinded him. It had erased his memory. It had erased his soul. I stood up then, slowly, painfully. I walked over to the small steel sink in the corner of the cell and poured a cup of lukewarm water. I drank it, taking my time, letting David stew in his own agitation. Then I turned to face him. You don't know who she is, do you? I asked softly. David blinked, confused by the shift in my tone. What who Bertie Miller? I said. You looked at her in that courtroom today. You saw her dirty coat. You saw the tape on her shoes. You saw a nuisance. But you didn't see her face. I don't know what you are talking about, David snapped. She is just a case number. No, David, I said, stepping closer to him until I was inches from his face. She is not a case number. 40 years ago, her name wasn't Bertie, it was Bernadette, and she wasn't homeless. She lived in the apartment next to us on Elm Street. David froze. The name Bernadette flickered somewhere deep in his subconscious, a ghost from a past he had buried under layers of expensive education and country club memberships. Your mother got sick when you were 6 months old. I continued, my voice trembling slightly with the memory of that terrible winter. The cancer moved fast. Faster than the doctors predicted. She was too weak to hold you. She was too weak to feed you. I was working double shifts at the district attorney's office just to keep the lights on and pay for her medication. I couldn't afford a nanny. I couldn't afford formula half the time. David was staring at me now, his mouth slightly open. He had heard stories of his mother's illness, but never the details. I had always shielded him from the desperation of those days. Bernadette had a baby of her own that year, I said. A little girl. But that baby died of pneumonia in the crib. Bernadette was grieving, she was broken, but every morning before I went to work she would come over. She would take you from your crib. She would hold you. And she fed you, David. She nursed you when your own mother couldn't. She gave you the milk that was meant for her dead child because she didn't want to see another baby die on her watch. David's face went pale. He stepped back, hitting the bars of the cell door. The arrogance was draining out of him, replaced by a dawning horror. That woman, that homeless woman, is Bernadette, David whispered. Yes, I said. Life was hard on her after her husband left. She lost her job. She lost her apartment, she fell through the cracks, but she never lost her dignity. Until today. Until my son and his wife dragged her into a courtroom, called her a trespasser on the very land her grandmother used to farm, and threw her in a cage like an animal. I pointed a finger at David's chest. His silk tie looked like a noose now. You stood there, David. You stood in that courtroom and watched your wife sentence the woman who saved your life to 30 days in prison. And you didn't say a word. You worried about your reputation. You worried about your dinner reservation. Dad, I didn't know, David stammered, tears welling up in his eyes. I swear I didn't know. It doesn't matter that you didn't know. I shouted, my voice finally breaking the calm facade. It shouldn't matter. You shouldn't need a personal connection to treat a human being with decency. You shouldn't need to owe someone a debt to know that throwing an old woman on the street for profit is evil. I turned my back on him. I couldn't look at him anymore. The disappointment was too heavy. It crushed me more than the handcuffs ever could. "Go home, David," I said to the wall. "Dad, please." David sobbed. "Let me fix this. I will talk to Caroline. We can drop the charges against Bertie. We can find her a shelter. Just please come home. Stop the federal investigation. Don't destroy us." I laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. "You still don't get it. You are trying to make a deal. You are trying to negotiate with justice." I turned back to him one last time. My face was stone. "I am not coming home, David, and I am not stopping anything. The investigation has already started. The ball is rolling down the hill and you are standing at the bottom." "But the hearing," David stuttered. "The hearing is tomorrow at the county courthouse. Caroline can fix it there. She can dismiss it quietly." I shook my head. "No. Tell your wife she doesn't need to bother going to the county courthouse tomorrow. I have already filed a motion for a change of venue." "Change of venue to where?" "To the federal district court," I said. "And tell her she isn't the presiding judge anymore. She is the defendant." David looked at me as if I had just spoken a death sentence. In a way I had. I had just killed his lifestyle. I had just killed his ignorance. "Get out of my sight," I whispered. David stood there for a long moment, tears streaming down his face. He wanted to say something else. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to be the son I remembered. But he was too weak. He turned around and walked out of the cell block. His footsteps were slower this time, heavier. He walked like a man carrying the weight of a sin he could never wash off. I watched him go. I felt a tear roll down my own cheek. I wiped it away angrily. There was no time for grief. Not yet. I had a war to win. I sat back down on the cot and waited for the sunrise. Tomorrow the world would know who Mose Wright was. But more importantly, tomorrow the world would know who Bertie Miller was, and God help anyone who tried to stand in her way. The silence returned to the cell block after my son left, but it was heavy with the ghost of his betrayal. I did not have to wait long for the next visitor. 10 minutes later, the heavy steel door at the end of the corridor buzzed open again. This time the footsteps were not frantic like Sheriff Brody's, and they were not hesitant like David's. They were rhythmic, confident, and aggressive. It was the sound of Italian leather marching into a war zone. I looked up to see a man who looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine cover for high-stakes litigation. He was tall, wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than the sheriff's annual salary. He carried a leather briefcase that had seen the inside of the Supreme Court more times than I could count. His name was Elias Thorne. 20 years ago, I hired him fresh out of law school because I saw a hunger in his eyes that reminded me of myself. Now he was the managing partner of one of the most feared law firms in Washington, D.C., and the only man I trusted with the keys to the vault. Sheriff Brody was trailing behind him, looking like a nervous bellboy carrying a file box. Elias stopped in front of my open cell door and looked at me. He did not look at the toilet in the corner or the stains on the floor. He looked at me with absolute respect. "Hello, Mose," Elias said, his voice smooth and deep. "You are looking surprisingly well for a man who has been kidnapped by the local government." I stood up and shook his hand. The grip was firm. "Hello, Elias. I apologize for dragging you out of bed." Elias smiled a sharp, predatory smile. "Are you kidding? I was at a fundraiser listening to a senator drone on about tax reform. This is the most fun I have had in months. Besides, when the hammer calls, the world stops." He turned to Sheriff Brody. "Leave the box, Sheriff, and close the door on your way out. We have attorney-client privilege to discuss, and unless you want me to add a violation of the Sixth Amendment to the federal lawsuit I am currently drafting, I suggest you ensure the recording devices in this room are turned off." Brody went pale. He placed the box on the small metal table and practically ran out of the room. Elias kicked the door shut with his heel, and then his demeanor changed. The smile vanished. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a tablet and a stack of documents. "We have a problem," Mose Elias said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I pulled the property records for 4th and Main like you asked. I dug deep, deeper than anyone has looked in 50 years, and I asked though I already knew the answer in my bones." Elias laid a map of the city on the cot. He pointed to the small square of land where Bertie Miller lived in her makeshift shelter. Caroline has been busy, Elias said. She didn't just rule against Bertie today. She has been orchestrating a theft. Look at this. He handed me a document. It was a transfer of deed dated 6 months ago. It claimed that the plot on 4th and Main was abandoned property with no known heirs, and therefore under the city's eminent domain laws it was being seized for public development. At the bottom of the order, verifying that a diligent search for the owner had been conducted and came up empty, was a signature I knew well. Judge Caroline Sterling. She lied, I said, staring at the signature. She certified that there was no owner. She did worse than lie, Elias corrected. She erased history. I closed my eyes and let my mind travel back, not to 6 months ago, but to 1865. I thought of my great-grandfather, Silas Wright. He had been born a slave on a cotton plantation in Georgia. When emancipation came, he walked 500 miles with nothing but the clothes on his back. He worked in the rail yards, saving every penny, eating scraps, sleeping in barns. It took him 10 years to save enough money to buy his first piece of freedom. He bought a small plot of land right here in this city. It was a rocky, unwanted patch of dirt on the corner of 4th and Main. Silas built a house there with his own hands. He raised 6 children there. He planted a garden that fed the whole neighborhood during the Depression. That land was not just dirt. It was blood. It was the proof that the Wright family existed. It was the foundation of everything I became. When I entered the witness protection program, essentially when I retired into anonymity to keep my family safe from the cartels I had prosecuted, I put that land into a blind trust, I said softly. The Wright Heritage Trust. It is untouchable. Exactly, Elias said, tapping the paper. And that is where Caroline made her fatal mistake. She assumed, because the taxes were paid through a shell corporation in Delaware, that the owner was some faceless entity who wouldn't notice if the land was seized. She thought she was stealing from a ghost. She didn't know the ghost was her father-in-law, I muttered. Elias pulled out another photo. It was a grainy surveillance picture taken by one of his investigators just hours ago. It showed Bertie Miller tending to a small patch of tomatoes in the corner of that lot. And, Bertie, Elias asked, where does she fit in? Why is a woman like her living on a multi-million-dollar plot of land? I took the photo. My thumb brushed over Bertie's face. Because I asked her to, I said. When I went underground, I couldn't live there anymore. The house had been condemned years ago, but the land remained. I needed someone to watch over it. Someone to make sure the developers didn't just roll their bulldozers over my grandfather's legacy in the middle of the night. Bernadette, Bertie. She had nowhere to go. I gave her the key to the gate. I told her she could live there as long as she wanted on one condition, that she never let the garden die. I looked up at Elias. She isn't a squatter, Elias. She is the caretaker. She is the legal guardian of the Wright Heritage Trust property. I signed the power of attorney myself 15 years ago. It is in the safety deposit box in Zurich. Elias let out a low whistle. So when Caroline arrested Bertie for trespassing, she was arresting the legal tenant of the property I finished. And by seizing the land to sell to her developer friends, Caroline is not just committing fraud. She is stealing from the very family she married into. She is stealing her own husband's inheritance. Elias began to pace the small cell. This is it, Mose. This is the smoking gun. We have her on fraud, embezzlement, abuse of power, and falsifying public records. If we drop this tomorrow, she isn't just off the bench. She is going to federal prison for 20 years. He stopped and looked at me. But you know what this means for David. If we expose this, the assets she commingled with him, the house, the accounts, they will all be seized to pay restitution. David will be destitute. I thought about David. I thought about him standing in this very cell 20 minutes ago begging me to let his wife get away with it so he could keep his country club membership. I thought about Bertie shivering in a jail cell right now because she kept her promise to me. She protected my land when my own son wouldn't even protect his father. David made his choice. I said, my voice hard as granite. He chose the money. Now he can live with the cost. Elias nodded. He opened his briefcase again and pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. It was a formal complaint to the Federal Judiciary Oversight Committee and a motion to unseal the ownership records of the Wright Heritage Trust. I drafted this on the plane ride over, Elias said, handing me a heavy fountain pen. It just needs your signature. Once you sign this, there is no going back. The trust becomes public. Your identity becomes public. The quiet life you built, It's over. I took the pen. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a gavel. I looked at the signature line. It was not just a line. It was a precipice. I spent 40 years fighting for the law, Elias, I said. I fought to prove that the law protects the weak from the strong. If I let Caroline do this, if I let her use her robe to crush a woman like Bertie, then my whole life was a lie. I uncapped the pen. The ink was black. Black like the soil on 4th and Main. Black like the ink on the deed my great-grandfather signed with an X because he hadn't learned to write yet. I am not doing this for the land, I whispered. I am doing this for the principle. I pressed the pen to the paper. I did not sign it with the shaky hand of an old man. I signed it with the bold, sweeping strokes of Mose Wright. I signed it with the fury of a father who had been betrayed and the resolve of a prosecutor who had finally cornered his prey. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was loud in the silence of the cell. It sounded like a sword being drawn from a scabbard. I handed the document back to Elias. File it, I said. File it first thing in the morning, and serve Caroline with a copy personally. I want her to read it while she is drinking her morning coffee. Elias tucked the document into his briefcase and snapped the lock shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Consider it done, Elias said. What about you? Do you want to leave now? I can have you out in 5 minutes. No, I said, sitting back down on the cot. Caroline wants me in a cell. Fine. I will stay in the cell. I want her to come here tomorrow thinking she has won. I want to see the look on her face when she realizes she walked into the lion's den. Elias nodded, a smirk playing on his lips. You are a scary man, Mose. Remind me never to make you angry. I am not angry, Elias, I said, leaning back against the cold wall. I am just disappointed, and disappointment is a far more dangerous fuel than anger. Elias picked up his briefcase and knocked on the door for the guard. As he walked out, I looked at the empty space where he had stood. The pieces were moving. The trap was set. Caroline Sterling had spent her whole career judging others. Tomorrow she was going to learn what it felt like to be judged. And the verdict was going to be merciless. The morning sun rose over the city, casting long shadows that stretched like accusing fingers toward the courthouse steps. From my cell window, which offered a sliver of a view of the employee parking lot, I watched the world wake up. I had not slept since Elias left. I had spent the night meditating, preparing my mind for the storm that was about to make landfall. I knew exactly what time Caroline would arrive. She was a creature of habit, 7:45 sharp. She liked to arrive before her clerks so she could enjoy her artisanal coffee in silence and review her docket with a sense of superiority. Today, however, silence was the one thing she would not find. I watched from the narrow window as her silver Mercedes pulled into its reserved spot. She stepped out looking impeccable in a cream-colored power suit that probably cost more than Bertie Miller's entire life earnings. She adjusted her sunglasses, checked her reflection in the car window, and grabbed her briefcase. She looked like a woman who owned the world. She had no idea that the world had just changed ownership overnight. As she rounded the corner toward the main entrance, I couldn't see her anymore, but I could hear what happened next. It started as a low rumble like distant thunder and then erupted into a roar. It was the sound of 100 shutter clicks firing at once. It was the sound of reporters shouting over each other, a chaotic symphony of questions that were sharp enough to draw blood. Judge Sterling. Is it true you jailed a federal protected witness? Judge, did you know your father-in-law prosecuted the Gambino crime family? Your Honor. Do you have a comment on the fraud allegations regarding the 4th and Main development? I closed my eyes and smiled. Elias had done his job. He hadn't just filed the motion. He had leaked the filing to every major news outlet in the state. And he had given them the angle that every editor dreams of. The corrupt elitist judge versus the humble retired hero. Inside the courthouse, Caroline must have felt like she had walked into a propeller blade. I can only imagine the panic rising in her throat, the way her confident stride would falter as microphones were thrust into her face. She was used to controlling the narrative from behind a high bench. Out here on the concrete steps, she was just another suspect trying to hide her face with a designer handbag. She pushed her way through the mob, her security detail caught off guard by the sheer volume of the press. She rushed into the safety of the building, the heavy glass doors shutting out the noise but not the truth. The truth was already on the front page of the morning paper, being held up by a reporter in the front row. I had seen the digital proof Elias sent me. The headline was bold, black, and unforgiving. Judge Jail's father-in-law, the unsung civil rights hero who took down the mob. Below it was a picture of me from 1994 standing on the steps of the federal building looking young and fierce. And next to it a picture of me from yesterday being led away in handcuffs by my own daughter-in-law's bailiff. The contrast was devastating. Caroline made it to her chambers, her sanctuary. She slammed the door and leaned against it, gasping for air. Her heart must have been hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She went to her desk, her hands shaking so badly she probably spilled her coffee. She grabbed her phone. She didn't call her lawyer. She didn't call her PR team. She called the person she always blamed when things went wrong. She called my son. I wasn't in the room, but David told me about the call later. He was still in bed, hiding under the covers, paralyzed by the guilt of our conversation the night before. When his phone rang and he saw her name, he almost let it go to voicemail. But fear is a powerful motivator, Caroline. David answered, his voice thick with sleep and dread. "You idiot," Caroline screamed on the other end. Her voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the cool, collected tone of a judge. It was the shrill, terrified shriek of a woman watching her life burn down. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you what?" David stammered. "Why didn't you tell me your father was Mose the Hammer Wright?" She yelled so loud David had to pull the phone away from his ear. "Why didn't you tell me he was the lead prosecutor on the RICO Act task force? The news is saying he has a presidential commendation. They are saying he is a legal legend." I didn't know," David whispered. "What do you mean you didn't know? He is your father." "He never talked about work," David cried, defending his own ignorance. "He was just Dad. He worked at the government office. I thought he was a clerk. I thought he filed papers. He never acted like a big shot. He drove a Ford. He wore cardigans. How was I supposed to know he was that?" "You are useless," Caroline hissed. "You and your pathetic, secretive family have ruined me. Do you know what they are asking me out there? They are asking if I jailed him to stop him from exposing the land deal. They are connecting the dots, David, and they are connecting them straight to your bank account." David went silent. The reality of the financial freeze hit him again. Caroline wasn't just mad about the bad press. She was mad because the narrative she had spun that I was a senile old nuisance had just exploded. You can't claim a man is mentally incompetent when the New York Times is running a retrospective on his brilliant legal strategy. "Fix this, David," Caroline demanded. "Get down here. Make a statement. Say he is estranged. Say he is abusive. Say something I can't." David said, his voice breaking. "I can't lie anymore, Caroline. I went to the jail last night. I talked to him. And did he sign the waiver? No. He told me about Birdie. He told me she saved my life when I was a baby." Caroline let out a scream of frustration. "I don't care about your baby stories. I care about my career. If you don't get down here and support me..." The line went dead. Not because David hung up, but because Caroline had another call coming in, a call she couldn't ignore. In her chambers, Caroline stared at her phone. The caller ID didn't say David anymore. It said State Bar Association President. Her blood must have turned to ice. She swallowed hard, composed herself, and pressed answer. "Good morning, Mr. President," she said, trying to force her voice into a professional register. "I can explain. The media has blown this completely out of proportion. It is a family matter that got out of hand." Judge Sterling. The voice on the other end was cold, detached, and final. It sounded like the voice of a man who was cutting off a gangrenous limb to save the body. "This is not a family matter, Caroline. This is a judicial crisis. I have the Attorney General on the other line. We have received a formal complaint from the Department of Justice regarding the unlawful detention of a federal asset. We have also received a dossier of evidence regarding the falsification of property records in the fourth and main case." "That is ridiculous," Caroline stammered. "That is hearsay. My father-in-law is confused. He is elderly." The dossier was signed by Elias Thorne, the president interrupted. "And it includes a chain of title verified by the Heritage Trust. It appears you signed an eviction order for a property you are actively trying to acquire for personal gain. That is a felony, Caroline." There was a long silence, the kind of silence where you can hear a career dying. Effective immediately, the president continued, his voice devoid of sympathy. "You are placed on administrative leave without pay pending a full ethics investigation. You are to vacate your chambers by noon. Do not hear any cases today. Do not speak to the press. And do not under any circumstances attempt to contact Mr. Wright or any witnesses involved in the Miller case. But my docket, Caroline whispered. I have trials scheduled. Your docket has been reassigned, he said. Goodbye, Ms. Sterling. He didn't call her judge. He called her Ms. Sterling. The title was gone, just like that. Caroline dropped the phone. It clattered onto her mahogany desk. She looked around the room. The awards on the wall, the photos of her shaking hands with the governor, the expensive leather chair. It all looked different now. It looked like a museum of a life that used to exist. She walked to the window and looked down. The reporters were still there like a pack of wolves waiting for a wounded deer. She realized with a jolt of terror that she couldn't leave. She was trapped in the very building where she used to be the queen. Meanwhile, down in the holding cell, the door opened. It wasn't Sheriff Brody this time. It was a U.S. Marshal. He was a giant of a man wearing a tactical vest and a grim expression. Mr. Wright, he asked. I nodded, standing up. We are here to escort you out, sir. The charges have been dropped. The district attorney personally quashed the warrant 5 minutes ago. I picked up my flat cap and placed it on my head. I am not leaving yet, Marshal, I said. The marshal looked confused. Sir, you are a free man. We have a car waiting to take you to a safe house or your residence. I walked to the door of the cell, but I didn't step into the hallway. I have one more meeting, I said, checking my old wristwatch. It is almost noon, and if I know my daughter-in-law, she will be coming downstairs right about now. She can't use the front door because of the press. She will have to use the secure exit, the one that goes right past this booking area. I sat back down on the bench right next to the open door. I will wait, I said. I want to say goodbye. The marshal looked at me, then he looked at the sheriff who was cowering in the corner. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He nodded slowly. Take your time, Mr. Wright, the marshal said, stepping back to stand guard. We are on your clock now. And so I waited. I waited for the sound of high heels. But this time I knew they wouldn't be clicking with the rhythm of arrogance. They would be dragging with the weight of defeat. The hammer was about to drop, and I wanted to look her in the eye when it hit. The elevator ride from the basement holding cells to the top floor of the courthouse took exactly 45 seconds. I counted every one of them. In that short vertical journey, I ascended from the damp, windowless world of the accused to the plush, mahogany-paneled world of the accuser. The U.S. Marshal stood silently beside me, his presence a heavy reminder of the power I now wielded. Elias, my attorney, checked his watch and adjusted his cufflinks. He didn't say a word, but he didn't have to. The look in his eyes said everything. It was the look of a gladiator entering the arena knowing his opponent was already bleeding. When the elevator doors slid open, the air changed. It didn't smell like bleach and despair anymore. It smelled of lemon polish, expensive coffee, and panicked sweat. The secretary's desk was empty. The phones were ringing off the hook, a cacophony of unanswered questions from the press, the mayor, and the ethics committee. We walked past the abandoned outer office and straight to the double doors that bore the gold plaque, Honorable Caroline Sterling. Elias reached for the handle, but I stopped him. I wanted to open this door myself. I pushed the heavy wood. It swung open to reveal a scene of controlled chaos. Caroline was not sitting behind her desk. She was frantically shoving documents into a shredder in the corner. Her hair, usually sprayed into an immovable helmet of perfection, was loose and wild. Her cream suit was rumpled. She looked like a captain looting her own ship before it sank. She heard the door open and spun around. When she saw me, her eyes didn't fill with regret. They filled with a toxic mixture of hatred and disbelief. She didn't see a federal asset. She didn't see a legal legend. She just saw the old man who had dared to ruin her morning. You! She screamed, abandoning the shredder. How dare you walk in here? This is a private chamber security. There is no security coming. Caroline, I said, my voice calm and low, cutting through her hysteria. The marshal is outside, and he isn't here to protect you. He is here to make sure you don't leave the building with anything that doesn't belong to you. Caroline marched toward me, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. She stopped inches from my face, invading my personal space just like she used to do at Thanksgiving dinners when she wanted to criticize my cooking. You think you are clever, don't you? She spat. You think because you made a few phone calls to your old buddies in D.C. that you have won. You have no idea what you have done. You have humiliated me. You have jeopardized a $50 million development project that would have revitalized this city. And for what? For a homeless woman. For your ego. I walked past her and sat down in one of the leather guest chairs. It was the same chair I had sat in 3 months ago when I came to ask her to join us for Christmas, and she had told me she was too busy saving the world. I didn't do this for my ego, Caroline, I said, crossing my legs. I did this because yesterday, in this very room, you signed an order that violated everything this building stands for. Caroline laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound. Oh, spare me the lecture, Mose. You are a dinosaur. You come from an era where the law was a blunt instrument. This is the modern world. We make deals. We make progress. You think you are some kind of moral authority? You are nothing. You are a retired bureaucrat living on a pension. You are the past. And the past has no business interfering with the future. I looked at her. I looked at the way her hands were trembling even as she tried to project strength. She was terrified, but her arrogance was the only shield she had left. I may be the past, Caroline, I said, leaning forward. But at least the past has a foundation. You are a stain on the present. You are the rot that eats away at the pillars of justice until the whole roof comes crashing down on everyone's head. How dare you, she hissed. I reached into the inside pocket of my cardigan. I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out a folded piece of parchment paper. It was yellow with age, brittle at the edges, but the ink was still dark and legible. You told the court yesterday that the lot on 4th and Main was abandoned, I said, placing the paper gently on her desk. You claimed you conducted a diligent search for the owner. You claimed the land had no voice. Caroline glanced at the paper, then looked away. I don't need to look at your trash. The title search was conclusive. The title search was a lie, I corrected her. You paid a clerk to bury the records, but you didn't dig deep enough. If you had, you would have found this. I tapped the paper with my index finger. This is the original deed of trust dated 1925. It established the Wright Heritage Trust. It lists the beneficiaries of the land. Caroline rolled her eyes. So, some dead relatives of yours. We can override that with eminent domain. The city needs that mall. Read the name of the current trustee, Caroline, I said. She hesitated. Curiosity or perhaps a dawning sense of horror forced her to look. She leaned over the desk. Her eyes scanned the document. She saw the name of the original owner, Silas Wright. Then she looked at the bottom at the amendment added 15 years ago. Current sole trustee and executor Mose Wright. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the paper, then she looked at me, then back at the paper. You, she whispered. You own the lot. I nodded. I have owned it since my father passed, and I placed it in a blind trust to protect it. When you arrested Bertie Miller for trespassing, you weren't arresting a squatter. You were arresting my employee. You were arresting the woman I hired to tend my family's garden. Caroline sank into her chair. The fight seemed to leave her body. She realized the magnitude of her error. It wasn't just a judicial mistake. It was a personal catastrophe. She had tried to steal land from her own father-in-law. I didn't know, she stammered. Her voice was small now. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't David tell me? Because we didn't think you would try to steal it, I said simply. We thought you were family, but clearly the only family you care about is the one printed on a dollar bill. Caroline sat there for a long moment, her mind racing. I could see the gears turning. She was processing the damage. She was calculating the legal exposure. Fraud, forgery, false imprisonment. It was enough to send her to prison for a decade. But then something shifted in her eyes. The fear was replaced by a glimmer of cunning. She looked at the shredder in the corner. Then she looked at the door, ensuring it was closed. She took a deep breath and smoothed her hair. A smile, fake and sugary, crept onto her face. It was the smile of a salesperson who realizes the customer is angry, so they have to offer a discount. Mose, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Listen to us. We are getting emotional. We are letting this get out of hand. She stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against the front of it, trying to create a sense of intimacy. Okay, so you own the land. That changes things. But it doesn't have to be a bad thing. In fact, this could be a blessing in disguise. I raised an eyebrow. A blessing. Think about it, she said, her excitement building. The developers are offering $5 million for that lot. 5 million Mose. If you own it, that money goes to you. And since I am the one brokering the deal, I can get them to bump it up to 6, maybe 7. She reached out and touched my knee. I recoiled, but she didn't notice. "We can keep this in the family," she continued. "I can dismiss the charges against Bertie. We can say it was a clerical error. I will wipe her record clean. I will even give her, I don't know, $10,000 to move somewhere else. She would be happy with that, right? And then you sell the land. You get millions. You can retire in style. You can buy a boat. You can help David." She leaned closer, her perfume overpowering the room. "And I keep my judgeship. The investigation goes away because there is no victim. If the owner of the land says it was all a misunderstanding, the Bar Association will drop the inquiry. We all win, Mose. Isn't that better than destroying your son's wife? Isn't that better than a scandal?" I looked at her. I looked at the desperation masking itself as generosity. She was trying to buy me. She was trying to buy her way out of a felony with my own money. She truly believed that every person had a price. She believed that 71 years of integrity could be washed away by the promise of a boat. I slowly stood up. I brushed the spot on my knee, where she had touched me as if brushing away dirt. "You really don't get it, do you?" I asked softly. "Get what?" she asked, her smile faltering. "It is a win-win." I walked over to the window and looked out at the city below. "I don't want your money, Caroline. And I certainly don't want a boat. You are offering me $7 million to sell my soul, but you forgot one thing." I turned back to face her. "I am the man who turned down a $10 million bribe from the cartel in 1995, and they threatened to kill me. You are just threatening to make me rich. You are out of your league." Caroline's face hardened. The mask fell off completely. "Don't be a fool, old man," she sneered. "If you pursue this, you destroy David too. He signed the financial disclosures. He is implicated in my assets. If I go down, he goes down. Do you hate me enough to sacrifice your own son?" That was the dagger. She knew exactly where to strike. She was using David as a human shield. I stared at her, feeling a cold resolve settle in my chest. "David made his choice last night," I said. "He chose his lifestyle over the truth. If he has to fall for me to stand tall, then so be it. A man must be accountable for his own house." I picked up the deed from her desk and handed it to Elias, who had been standing silently by the door recording every word on his phone. "Did you get that, Elias?" I asked. "Every word," Elias replied, tapping his pocket. "Attempted bribery of a federal witness. Add it to the list." Caroline gasped. You recorded this?" I walked to the door. "You have until noon to vacate the premises, Caroline. I suggest you start packing faster. The shredder can't eat a digital recording." I opened the door. The flash of cameras from the lobby downstairs seemed to flicker in the hallway. "Oh, and Caroline," I said, looking back at her one last time. She was standing in the middle of the room looking small, defeated, and utterly alone. What she whispered. "The hearing isn't at the county court anymore," I said. "It has been moved. You are going to be tried in the federal district court, in courtroom 1. Her eyes widened in horror. Courtroom 1 was known as the slaughterhouse. It was the room where I had prosecuted my biggest cases. It was my home turf. "See you in court, Your Honor." I closed the door, leaving her in the silence of her collapsing empire. As I walked down the hall, I didn't feel triumph. I felt the heavy, solemn weight of duty. The easy part was over. Now the real trial began. Caroline stopped pacing the length of her office. The threat of the federal district court hung in the air like smoke after an explosion, but I could see her mind working furiously to fan it away. She was a survivor, I had to give her that. She was a cockroach in a designer suit, always looking for the crack in the wall to scurry through when the lights came on. She took a deep breath, smoothed her skirt, and sat on the edge of her desk. Her posture changed. She was no longer the outraged victim. She was the deal-maker. She looked at Elias, then at me, and finally her gaze landed on David. My son was standing in the corner of the room staring at his expensive Italian shoes as if they were the most fascinating things on earth. He looked like a man waiting for a firing squad, hoping that if he stayed very still, the bullets would miss him. "David," Caroline said softly, her voice taking on a sickeningly sweet tone. "Pour your father some water. He looks thirsty." David moved automatically like a robot to the sidebar. He poured a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. His hands were shaking so badly the glass clattered against the pitcher. He brought it to me. I didn't take it. I just looked at him. He couldn't meet my eyes. He placed the glass on the table beside me and retreated to his corner. Caroline crossed her arms and leaned forward. "Okay, Mose," she said. "Let us cut the drama. We are all adults here. We know how the world works. You have leverage. I acknowledge that. You caught me with my hand in the cookie jar. Kudos to you. It was a hell of a maneuver." She paused, waiting for me to gloat. I remained silent. My silence was unnerving her more than any shout could. "But let us look at the reality," she continued. "You can go to federal court. You can drag this out for years. You can ruin my career. You can humiliate your son. And what do you get at the end of it? You get a plot of dirt that generates zero income. You get a pat on the back from a few civil rights groups. And then the news cycle moves on and you are just a lonely old man again." She reached into her drawer and pulled out a notepad. She uncapped a gold pen and wrote a number on it. She tore the page off and slid it across the polished mahogany desk toward me. Or she said, her voice lowering to a whisper, "We can end this right now. Today." I looked at the piece of paper. I didn't pick it up. The number was written in her sharp, angular handwriting. 2 followed by 6 zeros. $2 million. "That is 20% of the projected profit from the Omni Center deal," Caroline said, watching my face for a reaction. $2 million, Mose. Cash, paid into an offshore account of your choosing. No taxes, no paper trail. I stared at the paper. $2 million. It was more money than I had made in 40 years of public service. It was enough to buy a villa in Tuscany. It was enough to never worry about medical bills again. It was a life-changing amount of money. "And what do I have to do for this generosity?" I asked, my voice flat. Caroline smiled. It was the smile of a shark that smells blood. "Nothing difficult," she said. "You just have to sign a joint statement. A statement that says, well, that says you have been under a lot of stress lately, that you have been experiencing some confusion, memory lapses, maybe a touch of early-onset dementia." I felt a cold fire ignite in my chest. She wasn't just asking me to drop the lawsuit. She was asking me to destroy my own mind. She wanted me to go on public record and say that Mose Wright, the man known for his razor-sharp intellect, was losing his faculties. She wanted to castrate my reputation to save hers. "The statement will say that you misunderstood the property lines," she continued, talking faster now, "that you thought the city was taking the wrong lot. It was an honest mistake by a loving grandfather who isn't quite himself anymore. I will dismiss the charges against Bertie Miller. I will even get her into a nice state-run facility. And you take the money. You retire. You let David and me handle the heavy lifting." I looked at David. He was still staring at the floor, but I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. He was listening. He was hearing his wife propose that his father declare himself mentally incompetent for a payout. "David," I said. My voice was soft, but in the quiet room it sounded like a gavel strike. He didn't look up. "David, look at me." Slowly, painfully, my son raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked 10 years older than he was. "Do you hear this?" I asked him. "Do you hear what your wife is offering?" David swallowed hard. "Dad, it is a lot of money." I felt like he had slapped me. "It is blood money, David," I said. "She is asking me to sell my name. She is asking me to tell the world that I am crazy so that she can keep stealing. She is putting a price tag on my honor. Is that what I taught you? Is that what your mother taught you? That everything is for sale if the price is high enough?" David looked at Caroline. Then he looked back at me. I saw the conflict warring in his eyes, the fear of poverty versus the shame of betrayal. "Dad, please," David whispered, "if you don't take it. If she loses this job, we lose everything. The house, the cars, the club. I don't know how to live any other way." I looked at him with profound pity. That was the tragedy. He was a prisoner in the gilded cage and he was too afraid to fly. "You are already poor, David," I said. "You just don't know it yet." I turned back to Caroline. She was tapping her fingers on the desk, impatient. "Well," she asked, "what do you say Mose 2 million? Think about the cruises. Think about the comfort. Do you really want to spend your last years fighting a war you might not win?" I stood up. My knees didn't hurt anymore. My back was straight. I felt a surge of energy that defied my age. I picked up the piece of paper with the $2 million figure on it. Caroline's eyes lit up. She thought I was taking it. I slowly tore the paper in half. Then, in half again. And again. until it was just confetti. I let the pieces fall onto her pristine desk like snow. "I don't want your money, Caroline," I said, my voice echoing off the paneled walls. "I don't want your cruises, and I certainly don't want your pity." Caroline's face fell. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure venom. "You are a fool," she hissed. "You are a stubborn, senile old fool. You are going to walk out of here with nothing. I will destroy you in court. I will bury you in motions until you run out of pension money to pay your lawyer." I leaned over the desk, bringing my face close to hers. I could smell the fear beneath her expensive perfume. "You can try," I said. "But there is one thing you forgot, Judge. You forgot the first rule of cross-examination. Never ask a question if you don't already know the answer. And never ever assume the witness is unarmed." "Unarmed," she scoffed. "You have nothing." I reached into the breast pocket of my old cardigan. Carolyn flinched, thinking I was reaching for another document, but I didn't pull anything out. I just tapped the pocket gently with my hand. A rhythmic, deliberate tap, 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 tap. "What are you doing?" she asked, confusion clouding her eyes. "I am checking the battery," I said. "Battery." On the digital recorder, I explained calmly. "It has been running since I walked through that door. Every word, Caroline. The offer of $2 million, the condition that I perjure myself, the admission that you are trying to cover up a crime, it is all here, in high-definition audio." Caroline's face went white, not pale, white, like a sheet of paper. She looked at my pocket as if it contained a bomb. That is illegal," she stammered. "You can't record me without my consent. This is a private office." "Actually," I said, smiling for the first time, "this is a government building, and under federal law, which I know you haven't read in a while, one-party consent applies when there is evidence of an ongoing felony. Attempted bribery of a federal witness is a felony, Caroline, and you just confessed to it." David let out a small gasp. He covered his mouth with his hand. He realized it was over. "I don't want your money," I repeated, straightening my jacket. "I want the one thing you care about more than anything else in this world." I pointed to the black robe hanging on the coat rack in the corner. The robe she wore like a cloak of invincibility. "I want your robe, Caroline. I want your title. I want your license. And by the time I am done with you, the only bench you will be sitting on is the metal one in the cell you put me in last night." I turned to Elias. "Send the recording to the FBI, Elias, and send a copy to the press. I think the evening news will find this very interesting." I walked toward the door. I didn't look at David. I couldn't bear to see the ruin in his eyes. But as I reached for the handle, Caroline screamed, "No, you can't! Dad, please!" I stopped. I didn't turn around. "Don't call me Dad," I said. "That man is gone. You killed him when you put a price tag on his soul." I walked out of the office. The flashbulbs were waiting downstairs. The world was waiting. And for the first time in 20 years, the hammer was ready to strike. The war was on, and I had just fired the first nuclear shot. The ride to the federal building was silent, but it was not empty. The back of the black SUV smelled of leather and anticipation. I sat on one side and Bertie Miller sat on the other. She looked different. The marshals had given her a chance to shower and a clean set of clothes. The oversized coat held together by safety pins was gone, replaced by a simple gray sweater and slacks. The duct tape was gone from her shoes. But the biggest change was in her eyes. For years, whenever I visited her at the lot, her eyes had been darting, fearful, always scanning the perimeter for threats. She would mutter to herself, speaking in riddles to keep strangers away. It was a survival mechanism. If you act crazy, people ignore you. If you act crazy, the predators might think you are not worth the trouble. But today, inside the safety of a federal vehicle, the mask was gone. She looked at me, and for the first time in a decade, I saw the woman who used to nurse my son. I saw Bernadette. "Are we going to win, Mose?" she asked. Her voice was not the rasp of a homeless woman. It was clear. It was steady. It was the voice of a woman who had been waiting a long time for someone to listen. I reached out and patted her hand. Her skin was rough, calloused from years of digging in the earth, but her grip was strong. "We are going to do more than win, Bertie," I said. "We are going to make sure they never hurt anyone ever again." The car pulled into the underground garage of the Department of Justice field office. This was not the county courthouse with its cracked steps and overworked public defenders. This was a fortress of glass and steel. We were escorted up a private elevator to the top floor. The hallway was lined with serious men and women in dark suits who moved with purpose. When they saw me, some of them stopped. They recognized the old man in the cardigan. They whispered, "The hammer is back." I ignored them. My focus was entirely on the woman walking beside me. We were ushered into a conference room that overlooked the entire city. Sitting at the head of the table was District Attorney Marcus Sterling. No relation to Caroline, thank God. Marcus was a man I had trained myself 20 years ago. He was sharp, honest, and utterly fearless. When he saw me, he stood up immediately. "Mose," he said, shaking my hand with genuine warmth, "it is good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." He looked at Bertie. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with curiosity. "And this must be Ms. Miller," Marcus said. Bertie nodded. She didn't sit down immediately. She walked to the window and looked out at the skyline. She pointed a trembling finger toward the east side. "My garden is over there," she said softly. "I can't see it from here." The skyscrapers blocked the sun. Marcus pulled out a chair for her. "Ms. Miller, please have a seat. My team has reviewed the property records Mose provided. The fraud case against Judge Caroline Sterling is strong. We have the falsified deeds. We have the illegal eviction orders. But fraud is a white-collar crime. It usually results in fines, disbarment, maybe a few years in a minimum security facility." He paused, looking at me, then back at Bertie. "Mose tells me there is more. He tells me this wasn't just paper pushing. He tells me there was intimidation." Bertie sat down. She placed her hands on the polished mahogany table. They looked out of place against the expensive wood like roots growing through pavement. She looked at Marcus. Her eyes were hard as flint. "They didn't just want the land, Mr. Attorney," she said. "They wanted me dead." Marcus leaned forward, his pen hovering over his legal pad. "Tell me," he said. Bertie took a deep breath. She reached into the pocket of her new slacks and pulled out something that made the room go quiet. It was a small, battered composition notebook. The cover was stained with grease and dirt. The corners were dog-eared. It looked like trash. But to Bertie, it was the most valuable thing she owned. She placed it on the table. "They thought I was crazy," Bertie began. "That was my shield. When the men in the suits came, I would scream at the birds. I would tear at my hair. I would pretend I didn't understand their words, so they spoke freely in front of me. They thought I was just a fixture of the lot like an old stump." She opened the notebook. The pages were filled with handwriting. It wasn't the scribble of a madwoman. It was neat, precise, and chronological. It was a log, a diary of terror. November 12th. Bertie read, her voice unwavering. 3 men. Blue Ford pickup truck. License plate number GK942. They kicked over the tomato plants. The tall one, the one with the scar on his neck, he told me that winter was coming. He said old ladies freeze to death all the time in this city. He said it would be a shame if my shelter accidentally caught fire while I was sleeping. Marcus started writing furiously. December 3rd, Bertie continued flipping the page. 2 men this time. One of them was a police officer. Badge number 417. He didn't arrest me. He just stood there while the other man poured bleach into my water collection barrels. He told me the land was already sold. He said the judge was losing patience. Marcus stopped writing. "The judge?" He asked sharply. "Did they use her name?" Bertie looked up. "Oh yes, they liked to use her name. It made them feel powerful." She turned to a page marked with a red tab. January 15th, she read. "The man with the scar came back. He had a baseball bat. He smashed the window of my shed. He grabbed me by the coat. He threw me into the mud. He put his boot on my chest. He said, 'Caroline Sterling sends her regards, you old witch. You have 1 week to disappear or we bury you under the foundation of the new mall.'" The room was deadly silent. This wasn't fraud anymore. This wasn't a property dispute. This was racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations. This was RICO. This was a sitting judge using violent enforcers to threaten the life of a witness to facilitate a commercial deal. Marcus looked at me. His face was pale. "Mose, do you know who these men are?" I nodded. I pulled a file from my own briefcase. I slid it across the table. I had Elias run the plates Bertie wrote down. "The blue truck belongs to a construction company owned by the brother of the developer Caroline is in bed with. The man with the scar. That is their foreman. He has 2 priors for assault. And the police officer. He is on Caroline's personal security detail." Marcus picked up the notebook. He handled it like it was a holy relic. "This changes everything," Marcus whispered. This isn't just a corruption case. This is a criminal conspiracy. We are talking 20 years. Minimum." He looked at Bertie with a newfound respect. Ms. Miller Marcus said, "You understand that if we use this, you will have to testify. You will have to stand in front of a grand jury and point these men out. They will try to discredit you. They will try to say you are mentally unstable." Bertie smiled. It was a small, sad smile. "Let them try," she said. "I played the fool for 10 years to stay alive. I acted crazy so they wouldn't kill me. But I am done acting. I am ready to speak." She closed the notebook and patted the cover. "I wrote it all down," she said. "Every threat. Every time they laughed. Every time they mentioned the money. I knew one day someone would ask. I knew one day Mose would come back. I felt a lump in my throat. She had held the line. While I was living my quiet, retired life thinking I had protected the land by putting it in a trust, she had been on the front lines facing down thugs with nothing but a notebook and her wits." Marcus stood up. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Get the marshals in here," he ordered, "and get me a warrant for the arrest of the foreman and the developer, and update the warrant for Judge Sterling. Add conspiracy to commit assault and witness intimidation." He looked at me. "Mose, we need to move fast. If they find out we have the diary, they might try something desperate." "They already tried," I said, standing up. "That is why they threw me in jail. They thought if they cut off the head, the body would die. They didn't realize that Bertie wasn't the body. She was the heart." I walked over to Bertie and offered her my arm. "Come on, Bernadette," I said. "We have one more stop before we are done." "Where?" she asked. "The grand jury," I said. "It is time to tell your story to people who can actually do something about it." As we walked out of the conference room, I looked back at the table. The dirty, battered notebook sat there in the center of the polished wood. It looked small, insignificant. But I knew the truth. That little book was a bomb, and Caroline Sterling had just pulled the pin. The elevator ride down felt different. The weight was lifting off my shoulders and settling onto the shoulders of the justice system. I looked at Bertie. She was standing tall. She wasn't slouching. She wasn't muttering. She looked like a woman who had just reclaimed her name. "You know," she said softly as the doors opened, "I never stopped growing tomatoes. Even after they poured the bleach. I washed the soil. I brought in new dirt. I saved the seeds." Why, I asked. "Because," she said, looking me in the eye, "you can poison the ground, Mose, but you can't kill the will of something that wants to grow. That land belongs to your family. But the garden belongs to the truth, and the truth always finds a way to the surface." I squeezed her arm. "Yes, it does, Bertie. Yes, it does." We stepped out into the lobby. The press was gone chasing the story at the courthouse. But we didn't need cameras. We had evidence. We had the truth. And we had the living witness who was about to bring the whole house of cards crashing down. The game was over. The verdict was coming, and this time the judge was going to be the one in handcuffs. I was sitting in a safe house provided by the marshals, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My phone was on the table, silent, but I knew the silence would not last. Across town, the other half of this tragedy was playing out. I did not need to be in that house to know what was happening. I knew Caroline Sterling. I knew that when a narcissist is cornered, they do not reflect, they destroy. And I knew my son was walking into a storm that would either break him completely or forge him into something new. David drove home in a daze. The radio was off. The hum of the engine was the only sound in the world. He kept replaying the scene in Caroline's office, the way I had walked out, the way Elias had recorded everything, the way his wife, the woman he had idolized for 10 years, had tried to bribe his father with money she had stolen from his heritage. He pulled into the driveway of the mansion. It looked different tonight. It did not look like a home. It looked like a mausoleum. The windows were dark except for a flickering orange light in the living room. He unlocked the front door. The smell hit him immediately. It was not the smell of potpourri or expensive candles. It was the acrid, choking scent of burning paper. David ran into the living room. The sight that greeted him was something out of a nightmare. Caroline was on her knees in front of the massive stone fireplace. She had emptied the contents of the safe onto the Persian rug. Stacks of files, ledgers, and hard drives were scattered everywhere. She was grabbing handfuls of paper and shoving them into the fire. Her movements were jerky and manic. Her hair was wild, plastered to her forehead with sweat. She looked like a woman possessed. "Caroline," David shouted, dropping his keys. "What are you doing?" She did not turn around. She just kept feeding the fire. The flames licked at the edges of a deed, curling the paper into black ash. "I am cleaning up," she muttered, her voice raspy from the smoke. "I am fixing it. If there is no paper trail, there is no crime. They can't prosecute smoke, David. They can't subpoena ash." David walked over and grabbed her wrist. Her skin was hot, feverish. "Stop it!" he yelled. "It is too late. Dad has the recording. He has the original deed. You are just adding arson to the list of charges." Caroline ripped her arm away with a strength that surprised him. She stood up, breathing heavily. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot. She looked at him with a mixture of fury and desperation. "Do not tell me it is too late," she screamed. "It is never too late until the handcuffs are on. We can fix this. We just need to get our story straight." She grabbed him by the lapels of his jacket, pulling him close. The smell of smoke and fear on her was overwhelming. "Listen to me, David. Tomorrow, when the FBI comes, you are going to tell them that your father has been unstable since your mother died. You are going to tell them he has a history of delusions. You are going to say that he gave me permission to manage the land years ago verbally." David stared at her. She was asking him to perjure himself. She was asking him to destroy his father's credibility to save her own skin. "I can't do that, Caroline," David whispered. "You have to," she shrieked, shaking him. "Do you think this is just about me? If I go down, I am taking you with me. Who do you think signed the loan applications for this house? Who do you think is listed as the beneficiary of the offshore accounts? You are, David. If I go to prison, you go to prison. You lose the car, you lose the club, you lose every cent. You will be on the street with that homeless woman your father loves so much." David pulled away from her. He backed up until he hit the sofa. He looked at the woman he had married. He had always thought she was strong. He had thought her ambition was a virtue. Now he saw it for what it was. A disease. A cancer that consumed everything in its path. "Is that all I am to you?" David asked, his voice trembling. "An accomplice. An insurance policy." "Don't be stupid," Caroline spat, turning back to the fire. "We are partners. And partners do what is necessary to survive. Now help me find the tax returns from 2018. They show the transfer of funds from the shell company. If the feds find those, we are dead." She began frantically digging through a pile of papers on the floor. She was tossing things aside, reckless and wild. Old receipts, Christmas cards. And then she picked up a silver frame that had been sitting on the mantel. She looked at it for a split second, a look of pure disgust crossing her face. "Why is this still here?" she muttered. "I told you to get rid of this junk months ago. It doesn't match the decor." She tossed the frame toward the fire. It hit the hearth with a crack. The glass shattered. The photo inside slid out, curling near the heat of the flames. David froze. Time seemed to slow down. He looked at the photo. It was a black and white picture. It was faded and creased. It showed a young woman with a radiant smile holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. It was his mother, Sarah. And standing next to her, looking tired but proud, was a young Mose Wright. Caroline had just thrown his mother into the fire. Something inside David snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet sound of a tether breaking. The tether that had bound him to Caroline's expectations, to her money, to her validation. It severed completely. He lunged forward. He didn't care about the heat. He reached into the fireplace and grabbed the photo just before the flames could consume it. He burned his fingers, but he didn't feel the pain. He pulled the photo out and cradled it against his chest. Caroline looked at him, annoyed. "What are you doing?" she snapped. "It is just a photo, David. Let it burn. We need to focus on the tax returns." David stood up. He brushed the ash off the picture of his mother. He looked at her smile. He looked at his father's eyes. And then he remembered. He remembered the story Mose had told him in the cell, the story about Bertie, about Bernadette, about the woman who had nursed him when his own mother was dying. He realized then that Caroline had not just tried to burn a photo. She had tried to burn his history. She wanted him to be a man without a past, because a man without a past is easy to control. He looked at Caroline. He really looked at her. And for the first time in 10 years, he didn't see a judge. He didn't see a goddess. He saw a small, scared, vicious criminal. "No," David said. His voice was calm. Terrifyingly calm. Caroline stopped digging. She looked up. "What did you say I said no?" David repeated. "I am not helping you find the tax returns, and I am not lying to the FBI." Caroline stood up slowly. Her eyes narrowed. "You are walking on thin ice, David. If you walk out that door, you don't come back. You leave with nothing. No money, no house, no wife. David looked around the room. He looked at the expensive furniture that felt like stage props. He looked at the fire consuming the evidence of their fraudulent life. "I never had a wife," Caroline, David said softly. "I just had a boss, and I quit." He turned around and walked toward the door. "David," she screamed. "David, get back here. You are nothing without me. You are a loser. You are just like your father." David stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. "Thank you," he said. He walked out into the cool night air. The door slammed shut behind him, muting Caroline's screams. He walked to his car, but he didn't get in. He didn't want to drive the car she had bought him. He started walking. He walked down the long, winding driveway past the security gates and onto the public road. He walked for a mile until he reached a gas station. He stood under the flickering fluorescent lights, clutching the singed photo of his mother. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of freedom. He dialed the number. He didn't know if I would answer. He didn't know if I would ever speak to him again after what he had done, but he had to try. I was about to turn off the light in the safe house when the phone rang. I looked at the screen. David. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to let it ring. Part of me was still bleeding from the wound he had inflicted in the jail cell. But I am a father first and a prosecutor second. I picked up the phone. "Hello," I said, my voice guarded. There was silence on the other end for a long moment. Then I heard a sound that broke my heart. It was the sound of my son crying. Not the panicked crying of a man who lost his money, but the deep, heaving sobs of a man who found his conscience. "Dad," David choked out. "Dad, are you there?" "I am here, son," I said softly. "I left her," David said, his voice thick with tears. "She was burning everything. She tried to make me lie about you. She threw Mom's picture in the fire." I closed my eyes. I gripped the phone tighter. "Are you safe?" I asked. "I am at the gas station on Route 9, he said. "I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have any money." She froze the accounts. "It doesn't matter," I said. "We will figure it out, Dad," David said, taking a deep breath. "I want to testify." I paused. "David, you don't have to do that. If you testify against your wife, you are implicating yourself. You could face charges for being a beneficiary of the fraud." "I don't care," David said firmly. "I don't care if I go to jail. I can't let her do this to you. I can't let her do this to Bertie. You asked me yesterday if I remembered who fed me. I remember now, Dad. I remember everything." I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It was the first time I had cried since the arrest. "I am proud of you, David," I whispered. "I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry for everything. I know, son. I know. Stay where you are. I am sending the marshals to pick you up. You aren't alone anymore." I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment in the silence of the room. The war was far from over. Tomorrow would be brutal. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't fighting just for a piece of land. I wasn't fighting just for Bertie. I had fought for my son's soul. And I had won. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, Caroline was watching her world turn to ash. But somewhere else, under the harsh lights of a gas station, my son was finally standing on his own 2 feet. The hammer was ready. But this time, I wasn't swinging it alone. The hearing room of the State Judicial Ethics Council was a place designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous hall lined with portraits of dead judges who stared down from the walls with judgmental eyes. The air was thick with the scent of old law books and furniture polish. At the front of the room sat a panel of 5 senior judges wearing their black robes like armor. In the gallery behind me, the press was packed shoulder to shoulder, their pens scratching against notepads like a swarm of insects. And sitting at the defendant's table, looking like a porcelain doll that had been glued back together, was Caroline. She had hired the best defense money could buy. His name was Thaddeus Black. He was a man I knew by reputation only. He was a shark who swam in the murky waters of high-stakes litigation, known for destroying the character of witnesses before they could even take the oath. He wore a suit that shimmered under the lights and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I sat at the plaintiff's table. Elias was next to me, his briefcase bulging with evidence. But I had told him before we walked in that today he was just a spectator. Today I was representing myself. Thaddeus Black stood up to give his opening statement. He didn't walk to the podium. He strolled. He owned the floor. He looked at the panel of judges with a look of shared sorrow as if he were about to tell them a tragedy. "Your Honors," Black began, his voice smooth as velvet. "We are gathered here today not to judge a crime but to witness the sad decline of a family. The allegations against Judge Sterling are serious, yes, but they are based entirely on the testimony of one man, Mr. Mose Wright." He turned and pointed a manicured finger at me. "Mr. Wright is a man we should pity, not believe. We have submitted medical opinions from 3 independent experts who suggest that Mr. Wright is suffering from advanced cognitive decline. Alzheimer's. Your Honors is a cruel thief. It steals a man's memory, his judgment, and finally his reality. Mr. Wright believes he is fighting a crusade against corruption. In reality, he is fighting the ghosts of his own confusion. He caused a disturbance in Judge Sterling's court because he didn't know where he was. He imagines conspiracies where there are only zoning laws." Caroline wiped a fake tear from her eye. The performance was flawless. Black continued pacing in front of the panel. "We ask that you dismiss these charges immediately. Judge Sterling didn't jail a whistleblower. She placed a confused elderly relative in protective custody for his own safety. This isn't a corruption case. It is a family tragedy. Let us not ruin a brilliant woman's career because her father-in-law forgot to take his medication." The room went silent. I could feel the eyes of the panel shifting toward me. Pity. Doubt. They looked at my gray hair, my old cardigan, my wrinkled hands. They saw exactly what Black wanted them to see. A senile old man. The chairman of the panel, Justice Hemlock, looked over his glasses at me. "Mr. Wright," he said, his voice gentle, "you have the right to counsel. Mr. Thorne is an excellent attorney. Perhaps it would be best if he spoke for you." I placed my hands on the table. I didn't stand up immediately. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I let Thaddeus Black smirk. I let Caroline relax. Then I pushed my chair back. It scraped against the floor, a harsh, deliberate sound. I stood up. I didn't lean on the table. I didn't look at notes because I didn't have any. My table was bare. "Thank you, Justice Hemlock," I said. My voice was not the shaky rasp of an old man. It was the deep, resonant baritone that had commanded federal courtrooms for 30 years. But with all due respect to Mr. Thorne, I don't need a translator to speak the truth. I walked to the center of the room. I didn't stroll like Black. I marched. I stopped exactly 6 feet from the panel. "Mr. Black has spoken very eloquently about my health," I began. He cited 3 independent medical experts. That is impressive. However, I would like to direct the panel's attention to Rule 702 of the Federal Rules of Evidence regarding expert testimony. I turned to Black. "Mr. Black, can you tell me the names of these experts?" Black blinked. He hadn't expected a question. "Well, they are. They are listed in the brief." "I haven't read your brief," I said. "I don't need to, because I know for a fact that not a single doctor has examined me in the last 5 years other than my optometrist. So unless you are basing a diagnosis of Alzheimer's on my prescription for reading glasses, your experts are committing perjury, and you are suborning it." Black's smile faltered. "Objection," he shouted. "The witness is arguing facts not in evidence. I am not a witness." "Mr. Black," I snapped, "I am the plaintiff, and I am not arguing. I am cross-examining your lies." I turned back to the panel. "You want to test my memory? Fine. Let us test it." I looked at Justice Hemlock. "Justice Hemlock, you wrote the dissenting opinion in the case of State versus Miller in 1989. You argued that property rights cannot be superseded by municipal interest without clear and convincing evidence of abandonment. Page 42, paragraph 3. You quoted Locke. Government has no other end but the preservation of property." Hemlock's eyebrows shot up. He nodded slowly. "I did write that." I turned to the judge on his right, Justice Vance. "In 2004, you presided over the ethics hearing of District Attorney Lewis. You ruled that the appearance of impropriety is as damaging to the judiciary as impropriety itself. Canon 2 of the Code of Judicial Conduct." I turned to Caroline. She was staring at me, her face pale. "And Judge Sterling," I said, "last Tuesday at 9:14 a.m. in courtroom 302, you cited City Ordinance 45B to evict Bertie Miller. But you forgot something. Ordinance 45B was repealed in 2018. It was replaced by Ordinance 52C, which requires a 30-day notice for eviction. I took a step closer to the panel. So tell me, Your Honors, who is the one suffering from memory loss? Is it the old man who can recite the case law of this state going back 40 years? Or is it the sitting judge who forgot the basic statutes of her own city because she was too busy trying to steal a plot of land? Thaddeus Black rushed to the podium. Your Honors, this is grandstanding. Mr. Wright is clearly having a manic episode. He is obsessed with minute details. That is a symptom of dementia. I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. Obsessed with details, I asked. Mr. Black, the law is details. Justice is details. If you miss a detail, a man goes to prison for a crime he didn't commit. If you miss a detail, a woman loses her home. I walked over to Black. I towered over him. You say I am confused. You say I don't know reality. Let me tell you my reality. I held up one finger. Fact 1. The land on 4th and Main belongs to the Wright Heritage Trust. I established it on June 12, 1998. The deed is recorded in Book 405, page 88 of the County Registry. I held up a second finger. Fact 2. On November 4th of last year, Caroline Sterling accessed the city planning database using her judicial login. We have the server logs. She searched for unclaimed properties in District 4. I held up a third finger. Fact 3. Last night in her office, Caroline Sterling offered me $2 million to drop this case. She specified that the money would come from the developer's slush fund. The room erupted. Reporters jumped to their feet. The judges on the panel gasped. Thaddeus Black looked like he had been punched in the gut. He looked at Caroline. She was shaking her head frantically, mouthing, "No, no, no." "That is a lie," Black screamed. "You have no proof. That is the hallucination of a sick man." I smiled. It was the smile of the hammer. "I was hoping you would say that, Mr. Black." I turned to Elias. "Mr. Thorne, if you would please." Elias stood up. Elias stood. He didn't say a word. He just placed a small silver digital recorder on the table. He pressed a button. The voice of Caroline Sterling filled the cavernous room. It wasn't the polished voice she used in court. It was the desperate, conniving voice from yesterday. $2 million, Mose, cash, paid into an offshore account. You just have to sign a statement that says, you have been experiencing some confusion. The audio was crystal clear. Every syllable was a nail in her coffin. I watched Caroline. She didn't look at the panel. She didn't look at her lawyer. She looked at me. And in her eyes I saw the exact moment her world ended. She slumped in her chair, a puppet whose strings had been cut. I signaled Elias to stop the recording. I looked at the panel of judges. They were stunned. Justice Hemlock looked furious. "Mr. Black," I said softly, "I believe your diagnosis was incorrect. I don't have Alzheimer's. I have a very, very long memory. And I remember exactly what happens to lawyers who try to bribe federal witnesses." I walked back to my table and sat down. I didn't need to say anything else. I didn't need a closing argument. The silence in the room was loud enough. Thaddeus Black was gathering his papers. He was trying to distance himself from his client. He knew the ship was sinking and he wasn't going to go down with it. Justice Hemlock banged his gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. "We will take a recess," he announced, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "And I suggest, Mr. Black, that you use this time to explain to your client the concept of a plea bargain, because from where I am sitting, she is going to need it." As the judges filed out, I looked across the aisle. Caroline was alone at her table. Her expensive lawyer had turned his back on her. The press was shouting questions. But I just felt a profound sense of calm. I had proven my sanity. I had proven my strength. And I had proven that no matter how much polish you put on a lie, it will never shine as bright as the truth. Bertie Miller was sitting in the back row. She caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up. I winked at her. The hammer hadn't lost his touch, not by a long shot. The recess lasted exactly 45 minutes. In that time, the atmosphere in the hearing room had shifted from a tense legal battle to something that felt more like a public execution waiting to commence. The air conditioning was humming, but it did nothing to cool the stifling heat of anticipation that hung over the gallery. I sat at my table, my hands folded calmly in front of me. Elias was next to me, checking the battery level on the small silver device that lay between us. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. We were two old lions watching a gazelle try to limp away from a broken leg. When the bailiff announced the return of the panel, the room stood up in unison. Justice Hemlock walked in first, his face like a thundercloud. The other 4 judges followed, their expressions unreadable but grim. They took their seats, the leather creaking in the silence. Caroline was already seated at the defense table. She had used the recess to fix her hair and reapply her makeup. The wild, desperate woman I had seen in her office yesterday was gone. In her place was the martyr. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, looking small and fragile next to her shark of a lawyer, Thaddeus Black. Black stood up before the judges had even settled. "Your honors," he boomed, his voice full of righteous indignation. "During the recess, my client informed me of a shocking development. It appears that Mr. Wright's accusations of bribery are not only false, but they are a projection of his own conduct. We would like to call Judge Caroline Sterling to the stand to clarify the events of last night." Justice Hemlock looked at me. I nodded once. Let her speak. Let her dig the hole so deep she can never climb out. Caroline walked to the witness box. She moved slowly, holding the railing as if she were weak. She took the oath, her voice trembling just enough to sound heartbroken. She sat down and looked at the panel with wide, innocent eyes. Judge Sterling Black asked gently, "Did you meet with your father-in-law, Mose Wright, in your chambers last night?" "Yes," Caroline whispered. "I did." "And can you tell the panel what happened?" Caroline took a deep breath. A single perfect tear rolled down her cheek. "I was working late trying to catch up on my docket after the incident at the jail. Mose came in. He was very agitated. He started shouting about the land on 4th and Main. He said he owned it. He said if I didn't give him $5 million from the city's development fund, he would ruin me." A gasp rippled through the gallery. The reporters scribbled furiously. It was a bold lie. It was a lie that turned the victim into the villain. $5 million, Black asked, feigning shock. "He tried to extort you." "Yes," Caroline sobbed. "He said he was old and he deserved a payout. He said nobody would believe me because of the bad press. I told him I couldn't do that. I told him it was illegal. I told him I loved him and I wanted him to get help for his memory issues. But he just laughed. He said he would bury me." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. It was a masterclass in manipulation. For a moment, even I was impressed. She had taken the truth and inverted it so completely that it sounded plausible. If you didn't know her soul was black as coal, you might have believed her. Black turned to the panel, looking triumphant. "You see, your honors, this is not a case of judicial misconduct. This is a case of elder abuse where the abuser is the elder himself. Mr. Wright is confused, greedy, and dangerous. We ask that these proceedings be dismissed and a protective order be issued against him." Justice Hemlock looked at me. His eyes were hard. The testimony had shaken him. No judge wants to believe one of their own is a criminal. They wanted to believe Caroline. They wanted an excuse to let her off the hook. "Mr. Wright," Hemlock said, "do you wish to cross-examine the witness?" I stood up. My knees popped, the only sound in the silent room. I didn't walk to the podium. I walked straight toward the witness box. I stopped 5 feet away from her. I looked into her eyes. Beneath the fake tears, I saw a flicker of triumph. She thought she had won. She thought her performance was enough to erase the facts. "I have no questions for the witness, Your Honor," I said clearly. Caroline exhaled a tiny sigh of relief. Black smirked. "However," I continued, turning to the panel, "I do have one piece of rebuttal evidence." I walked back to my table and picked up the silver recorder. I held it up so everyone could see it. It caught the light from the overhead fixtures. Judge Sterling just testified under oath that I demanded $5 million. She testified that she refused. She testified that she acted with integrity. I walked back toward Caroline. She was staring at the device in my hand. Her skin, which had been flushed with the heat of her performance, turned the color of old ash. "If that is true, Caroline," I said softly, "then you have nothing to fear from this." I placed the recorder on the ledge of the witness box right in front of her microphone. Thaddeus Black jumped up. "Objection. We haven't authenticated that recording. We don't know where it came from. It could be doctored. It is a digital file." "Mr. Black," I said without looking at him, "it has a timestamp. It has a metadata signature. And unlike your client, it doesn't know how to lie." I looked at Justice Hemlock. "May I, Your Honor?" Hemlock looked at Caroline. He saw the terror in her eyes. He saw the way she was gripping the armrests of her chair so hard her knuckles were white. He knew. In that moment, he knew. "Proceed." "Mr. Wright," Hemlock said, I reached out and pressed the play button. For a second there was only the hiss of static, then the sound of a door closing, and then a voice filled the room. It was loud, it was clear, and it was undeniably Caroline Sterling. "Okay, Mose, let us cut the drama. We are all adults here. You have leverage, I acknowledge that." The Caroline in the witness box squeezed her eyes shut. The Caroline on the recording continued, her voice dripping with arrogance. "Or we can end this right now. Today. $2 million, Mose. Cash, paid into an offshore account of your choosing. No taxes, no paper trail." The gasp from the gallery this time wasn't a ripple. It was a wave. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. Thaddeus Black sank back into his chair, covering his face with his hand. The recording played on. "And what do I have to do for this generosity?" my voice on the tape asked. "Nothing difficult," the recorded Caroline replied. "You just have to sign a joint statement, a statement that says, well, that says you have been under a lot of stress lately, that you have been experiencing some confusion, memory lapses. On the witness stand, the real." Caroline let out a small, strangled sob. She looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor, but the recording wasn't done. I wasn't going to stop it until the final nail was driven home. "I don't want your money, Caroline," my recorded voice said. "You are a fool," the recorded Caroline hissed. The venom in her voice was shocking compared to the sweet tone she had used minutes ago. "You are a stubborn, senile old fool. You are going to walk out of here with nothing." There was a pause on the tape, the sound of paper tearing, and then the line that would end her career forever. $2 million, old man. Take it and get lost, or I will bury you in motions until you run out of pension money to pay your lawyer. I reached out and pressed the stop button. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy. It was suffocating. It was the sound of a reputation dying instantly. I picked up the recorder and put it in my pocket. I looked at Caroline. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at the empty space in front of her, hollowed out. I turned to the panel. "She didn't offer me help, Your Honors," I said quietly. "She offered me a bribe. She didn't try to protect me. She tried to buy my sanity, and when I refused, she threatened to bankrupt me." I looked at Justice Hemlock. His face was a mask of revulsion. He was looking at Caroline, not as a colleague, not as a judge, but as something dirty that had crawled onto his bench. His lips were pressed together in a thin white line. The other judges were looking away, unable to even look at her. Thaddeus Black stood up slowly. He didn't look at the panel. He began packing his briefcase. Mr. Black, Justice Hemlock asked, his voice icy. "Do you have any?" Redirect Black snapped his briefcase shut. "No, Your Honor, I do not. In fact, I would like to request a recess to discuss my continued representation of the defendant." He was quitting. He was walking away before the stench stuck to him. Hemlock turned his gaze back to Caroline. "Judge Sterling," he said. The title sounded like an insult coming from his mouth. "You are remanded into the custody of the marshals immediately pending a federal indictment. This panel finds you in contempt, and quite frankly, I find you repugnant." Caroline looked up. Her eyes met mine. There was no hate left in them, just fear. The raw, naked fear of a woman who realizes she is about to lose her freedom. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just turned my back on her. I walked back to my table and sat down next to Elias. "Did we get her?" Elias whispered. I looked at the marshals moving toward the witness box with handcuffs. "We got her," I said. As they pulled Caroline from the chair, she didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just looked at me one last time as the metal cuffs clicked around her wrists. It was the same sound I had heard in the courtroom 2 days ago when she had me arrested. But this time the sound was sweet. It was the sound of justice. The hearing should have ended the moment I played that recording. In any sane world, the bailiffs would have cleared the room, the panel would have issued their ruling, and Caroline would be on her way to a booking photo. But the wheels of justice, even when they are greased with the truth, can still grind slowly when a desperate animal is caught in the gears. Caroline Sterling was not just a criminal. She was a survivor. And survivors will drown anyone, even the people they sleep next to, just to keep their heads above water for one more second. As the marshals moved toward her, Caroline suddenly stood up. She shook off the hand of the officer. She didn't look defeated anymore. She looked frantic. She looked dangerous. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for a lifeline, and they landed on the one person who had not spoken a word all morning. "Wait!" Caroline screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You have it all wrong. You are looking at the wrong person." She pointed a trembling finger toward the back of the room. "Not at me, not at Elias." She pointed at the shadow standing near the exit door. "It wasn't me," she shrieked. "It was him. It was David." The room turned. Every head swiveled to look at my son. David was standing there wearing a rumpled jacket and jeans, looking like a man who had walked through a hurricane. He froze as the accusation hit him. "Your Honors," Caroline yelled, desperate to be heard. "My husband is an investment banker. He manages the finances. He set up the offshore accounts. I didn't know where the money came from. He told me it was legal. He told me the land deal was standard procedure. I was just following his advice. She was doing the unthinkable. She was throwing her own husband, the man she claimed to love, into the wood chipper to save herself. He is the one who wanted the money." Caroline continued, her lies flowing like sewage. "He has gambling debts. He has failed investments. He used my position to cover his losses. I am a victim of financial abuse." The panel of judges hesitated. The accusation was plausible enough to cause a pause. David was a finance guy. It was possible in their minds that the ambitious husband had manipulated the judge-wife. Justice Hemlock looked at David. "Mr. Wright," Hemlock said, "please step forward." I looked at David. This was the moment. This was the test. Yesterday in the jail cell, he had been a broken boy. Today he had to be a man. He walked down the center aisle. He didn't look at the floor. He didn't look at the cameras. He kept his eyes locked on Caroline. Caroline saw him coming, and her eyes lit up with a sick kind of hope. She thought she could bully him one last time. She thought she could use their shared history, their shared secrets, to force him to take the fall. She mouthed the words, "Please, David," to him. It was a silent plea for him to die so she could live. David stopped at the railing. He looked at the panel. "May I approach the witness stand?" David asked. His voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. Justice Hemlock nodded. "You may." David walked over to the defense table. He stood next to his wife. Caroline grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "Tell them, David," she whispered loudly enough for the microphone to catch. "Tell them you handled the accounts. Tell them I didn't know." David looked down at her hand on his arm. He looked at the wedding ring on her finger. A ring he had bought with his first big bonus. A ring that symbolized a promise she had set on fire. Slowly, deliberately, David peeled her fingers off his arm. He dropped her hand. It fell to her side like a dead weight. He reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a handkerchief to dry her tears. He pulled out a thick, folded stack of documents. He turned to the panel. "Your Honors," David said, "my wife is correct about one thing. I am an investment banker. I know how money moves. I know how to hide it, and I know how to find it." He placed the documents on the judge's bench. "These are the unredacted bank statements from the shell company Caroline established 3 years ago." David stated clearly, "The company is listed in her maiden name. I am not a signatory on any of these accounts." Caroline gasped. "David, what are you doing?" David ignored her. He continued speaking to the judges, his voice gaining strength with every word. "If you look at page 4, you will see a transfer of $50,000 to the personal account of the city zoning commissioner. That transfer was authorized at 3 a.m. from an IP address located in this courthouse, specifically from Judge Sterling's chambers." He flipped the page. "On page 10, you will see a payment to a private security firm. The memo line reads, 'Consulting Services.' But if you cross-reference that with the dates in Bertie Miller's diary, you will see that every payment corresponds to a day when my father's property was vandalized." David turned to look at Caroline. She was staring at him with her mouth open, unable to comprehend that her doormat had just become a stone wall. And finally David said, pointing to the last page, "You will see a withdrawal of $2 million pending transfer to an offshore account in the Caymans. This was the money she offered my father last night. I was in the room when she made the offer. I heard her. And when she realized I wasn't going to lie for her, she tried to destroy the evidence." David reached into his other pocket and pulled out the singed, soot-stained photograph of his mother. "She tried to burn the files," David said, holding up the photo. "She tried to burn our history. But she forgot that paper leaves ash, and money leaves a trail." He turned back to the panel. "I am not a victim, Your Honors. I was an enabler. I looked the other way for years while she bought cars and clothes with money that wasn't hers. I am guilty of cowardice, but I am not guilty of bribery, and I am done protecting the person who committed it." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hovering at the top of the track. Caroline let out a sound that was not human. It was a guttural scream of pure, unadulterated rage. She lunged at David. She clawed at his face, her composure completely shattered. "You traitor!" she screamed, spittle flying from her mouth. "You useless, pathetic traitor! I made you. I bought you. You are nothing without me. I own you." The marshals tackled her before she could do any real damage. They pulled her back, pinning her arms behind her. She was thrashing, kicking, screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush. It was the ugly, raw face of a narcissist who has lost control. David didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He stood his ground, watching the woman he had married turn into a monster. He reached up and touched his cheek where she had scratched him. A small drop of blood appeared. "I own you," Caroline screamed again as they dragged her toward the side door. "You are weak. You are not a man. You are a child." David took a deep breath. He straightened his jacket. He looked at her with a calmness that was devastating. "No, Caroline," David said, his voice carrying over her screams. "I am not a child." He looked over at me. He locked eyes with me across the room. I nodded at him. A small, proud nod. "I am learning how to be a man," David said to her. "I am learning it from my father. And the first lesson is that you don't stand next to evil just because it pays the bills." Caroline screamed again, but the heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off her voice. The room was left in a stunned silence. Justice Hemlock looked down at the documents David had provided. He looked at David. "Mr. Wright," the justice said softly, "you understand that by submitting these documents you may be opening yourself up to a conspiracy charge." "I understand, Your Honor," David said. "Why?" Hemlock asked. "Why turn them in now?" David looked at the singed photo in his hand. He looked at the face of his mother, Sarah. "Because, Your Honor," David said, "my father told me yesterday that I was poor and didn't know it. I didn't want to be poor anymore. I wanted to have something that money couldn't buy." He walked over to the plaintiff's table. He didn't go to the gallery. He walked right up to me. He stood in front of me, his eyes filled with tears, but his head held high. "Did I do good, Dad?" he whispered. I stood up. I ignored the judges. I ignored the press. I wrapped my arms around my son and pulled him into a hug that I should have given him 20 years ago. I held him tight, feeling him shake against me. "You did good, son," I whispered back, my voice thick with emotion. "You did good. You are home now." The flashbulbs erupted behind us, capturing the moment. But I didn't care about the news. I didn't care about the case. I cared about the fact that the hammer had finally broken the chain that was strangling his family. And from the rubble, a man had finally emerged. The gavel did not bang. It did not strike the block with the sharp, authoritative crack that usually ends a hearing. Instead, Justice Hemlock placed it gently on the desk, as if he were putting away a weapon he no longer needed to use. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise could ever be. It was the silence of a tomb where a career had just been buried. Judge Caroline Sterling stood alone at the defense table. Her lawyer had fled. Her husband had testified against her. Her father-in-law had exposed her soul to the world. She looked small. The power suit that had looked like armor an hour ago now looked like a costume that didn't fit. She was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white, waiting for the blow that she knew was coming. Justice Hemlock adjusted his glasses and looked down at her. His face was not angry anymore. It was filled with a profound, weary disappointment. It was the look of a parent watching a child destroy something beautiful. "Caroline Sterling," he began, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "You were entrusted with the sacred duty of interpreting the law. You were given the power to decide the fate of others. To take away a person's freedom is the gravest responsibility a society can bestow upon an individual. And you used that power not to serve justice, but to serve your own greed." Caroline flinched with every word as if he were throwing stones at her. "You manipulated the docket. You falsified public records. You conspired with private interests to dispossess a citizen of their rights. And most despicably, you attempted to bribe a witness to conceal your crimes." He paused, letting the weight of the accusations settle over the room. "The evidence presented today is overwhelming and uncontested. Therefore, it is the ruling of this council that you are immediately stripped of your judicial authority. Your license to practice law in this state is hereby revoked permanently. You will never sit on a bench again. You will never sign a warrant again. You will never argue a motion again." Caroline let out a small, strangled sound. It was the sound of her identity shattering. Without the title of judge, she didn't know who she was. "But this council does not have the final say," Justice Hemlock continued. "We deal with ethics. The law deals with crimes." He gestured to the side of the room. "Marshals execute the warrant." Two federal agents stepped out from the shadows. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They walked with the slow, inevitable pace of a glacier. They walked straight toward the woman who used to command them. Caroline watched them come. She took a step back, bumping into her chair. Her eyes went wide with panic. She looked around the room, searching for an exit, searching for a friend. But there were no exits, and there were no friends. "Please," she whispered. "You can't do this. I am a judge." "Not anymore," one of the marshals said. His voice was flat. He pulled a pair of metal cuffs from his belt. "Caroline Sterling, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bribery of a public official, and conspiracy to deprive civil rights. You have the right to remain silent." Caroline tried to pull her hands away, a reflex of denial. But the marshal was stronger. He grabbed her wrists, pulling them behind her back. She struggled for a second, a pathetic thrashing movement like a bird caught in a net. "Stop," she cried out. "This is a mistake. My father-in-law is lying. David is lying." The marshal ignored her. He snapped the first cuff onto her right wrist. Click. Then he pulled her left arm back. Click. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest sound in the room. It was an echo, a perfect symmetrical echo of the sound that had started this entire nightmare 3 days ago. It was the same cold mechanical noise that I had heard when she ordered her bailiff to drag me out of her courtroom. The universe has a way of balancing the scales if you wait long enough. The marshal turned her around. For the first time, she faced the gallery. She faced the cameras, and she faced me. I was standing by my table. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. There is no joy in watching a family member fall, even a toxic one. There is only the grim satisfaction of knowing that the rot has been cut out. Caroline looked at me. Her hair was messy. Her mascara was running. She looked broken. In her eyes, I saw a plea. She wanted me to stop it. She wanted me to use my connections, my power to save her one last time. She wanted the father-in-law she had abused to become the savior she needed. I looked back at her. I held her gaze for a long, stretching moment. I remembered the way she had looked at me when I was in cuffs. I remembered the disdain, the arrogance, the way she had called me a senile old fool. I didn't say a word. I simply nodded. It was a small nod, a single sharp dip of the chin. It wasn't a gesture of forgiveness. It was a gesture of acknowledgement. It said, "You did this. This is the harvest you planted. Now you must eat the fruit." Caroline understood. Her shoulders slumped. The light went out of her eyes. She let the marshals lead her away. As she walked down the center aisle, the press pushed forward their cameras, flashing like lightning. She lowered her head, hiding her face from the very public she had so desperately wanted to impress. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind her. She was gone. The air in the room seemed to clear instantly, as if a window had been opened. Justice Hemlock looked at me. "Mr. Wright," he said, "the court apologizes for the indignity you suffered. Your record has been expunged, and the ownership of the property on 4th and Main is hereby reaffirmed as the sole asset of the Wright Heritage Trust." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. I turned to David. He was sitting on a bench in the back, his head in his hands. He looked up as I approached. He looked terrified that I would reject him now that the battle was won. "Come on, son," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Let us go tell Bertie the good news." The transition from the cold, sterile courthouse to the lot on 4th and Main was like stepping from black and white into color. 6 months later, the lot didn't look like a vacant wasteland anymore. It didn't look like a potential shopping mall. It looked like paradise. The chain-link fence was gone. In its place was a beautiful wooden gate built by hand. Above the archway, a sign swung in the breeze. It read, "The Sarah Wright Community Garden." I stood on the sidewalk, leaning on my cane, watching the activity inside. It was a Saturday morning, and the garden was alive. There were children running between the rows of corn. There were neighbors planting winter squash. There were young couples sitting on benches reading books. And in the center of it all, commanding the troops like a general, was Bertie Miller. She wasn't wearing old clothes anymore. She was wearing a sturdy pair of overalls and a sun hat. She was holding a basket of tomatoes that were redder than any ruby Caroline had ever owned. She looked healthy. She looked happy. She looked home. Behind her stood a small white cottage. It wasn't big. It was just a simple structure with a porch and a chimney. David and I had used the settlement money from the city's wrongful arrest lawsuit to build it. It was built on the exact spot where my grandfather's house had stood 100 years ago. Bertie saw me at the gate. She handed the basket of tomatoes to a young girl and walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "You are late, Mose," she said, her eyes twinkling. "The weeds don't wait for retired prosecutors." I smiled. I was meeting with the architects, Bertie. They are finalizing the plans for the greenhouse annex. Bertie looked at the cottage. She looked at the garden. She looked at the people who were laughing and working together. "You know," she said softly, "Caroline wanted to pave this. She wanted to put a parking lot here." I nodded. "She saw the price, Bertie. She never saw the value." Bertie reached out and took my hand. "She is in prison now, isn't she?" Bertie asked. 5 years, I said. Minimum security. She is working in the library. Maybe she will finally read the Constitution. Bertie laughed. It was a rich, throaty sound that scared away the crows. "And David?" she asked. I pointed toward the back of the garden. David was there shirtless and sweating, digging a trench for the new irrigation system. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't checking stock prices. He was working with his hands. He was building something real. "He is doing just fine," I said. "He comes here every weekend. He says the dirt clears his head." Bertie squeezed my hand. "You saved us, Mose," she whispered. "You saved us all." I shook my head. "No, Bertie. You saved the land. I just removed the weeds." I walked into the garden. The smell of wet earth and basil filled my lungs. It was the smell of victory. Not the kind of victory you get in a courtroom with gavels and verdicts, but the kind of victory you get when you plant a seed, water it, and watch it grow against all odds. I walked over to David. He stopped digging and looked up. He wiped the sweat from his forehead. He smiled. It was a real smile. "Hey, Dad," he said. "The soil is good here. Deep roots." I looked at him. I looked at Bertie. I looked at the garden that bore my wife's name. "Yes, son," I said. "Deep roots. And they are finally getting the water they deserve." I picked up a shovel. I was 71 years old. My joints hurt. My past was full of battles. But standing there under the sun with my family and my land, I felt younger than I had in years. The hammer had been put away. Now it was time to be the gardener, and the harvest was going to be magnificent.